Hey everybody, this is Ben from Pink Fohawk. We're an actual play podcast and we play 2nd edition Shadowrun, but you don't give a shit about any of that. You're here for the fucking book club and you've been waiting a long time. I'm going to apologize just on behalf of myself, really. But we're back. We're ready to go. We covered the behind the scenes chapter when we recorded this a few months back. Just FYI, just to let you guys know ahead of time, Tom Dowd was not able to make this meeting, but we forged ahead, got together, talked about behind the scenes, and honestly, it was kind of a really cool insight of a bunch of people, how we run our games, and a lot of just sort of comparing, contrasting how we do certain things and our interpretations of some of the rules. So we still had a blast. So here's the latest installment, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, hello.
Hello, 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 and welcome to the 2E Book Club.
Oh, that is going in. That's perfect. I couldn't have done that better myself.
Hey, what's up, Ben?
Hey, man. Looks like Matt won't be able to make it. I'm not sure if I never got a message back from Tom, so he might not make it tonight. But I figure,
well, good night.
Yeah, bloop bloop bloop. I just see everyone leave. But I just figure, this is the behind the scenes section. I mean, it's would be great to have that insight in the behind the scenes, if you will, of the behind the scenes, but I feel like he kind of has gone into a lot of that anyway, and I still had a lot of fun like reading it. I caught some things I didn't really notice, and what's really cool about it too is that it says right in the beginning, which I feel like needs to be said more, that you can like throw all that shit out. Like it basically is like you don't have to use any of this.
No, that's a great philosophy.
It really is.
The fast and loose philosophy. In not so many words.
It's the thing that's in every single role-playing game book, and every one of us forgets every time.
Right.
They're just like the rules are optional. It's a framework for having fun, and we're like, no, we have to do it the right way.
Where does it say that? Oh. Where does it say that?
I'm not supposed to read that. I'm not supposed to read behind the scenes. That's for GMs, man.
Yeah, that's for GMs.
That's hilarious.
No, I saw somebody online make a case that it is impossible to cheat as a GM because like someone had told them that if you fudge dice rolls as a GM that's cheating, and they're like, if you're a GM you can't cheat because all of this is coming out of your imagination. You can literally call a meteor down and wipe out the party, and that's fair game. So how is fudging a dice roll that serious?
Right. You don't understand. I own your imagination right now.
That's kind of the old school way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess now there's much more player agency in a lot of games that are not D&D.
Yep.
I personally, whatever. We don't have to get into that, but I like that a little bit more. I didn't get started in tabletop gaming until way later in life, but I still kind of connect with the kind of old school way of doing it a bit, but I do like the way that players have agency now. I feel like, especially Shadowrun, I felt like there was this, you needed to know the rules so you could like get back at you could like cover your ass with the GM. Yeah. Like be like, he can't get me on this because I've read through the rules a million times, and I my build I made is like he can't get me on here or here or here.
Yeah, well, and it tends to in my experience it tends to foster a sort of antagonism between the players and the GM, where the players are like trying to trick the GM and the GM's trying to trick the players, and you often end up with rules lawyering battles more than sitting around the table having fun.
Yeah. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like a story, right? So, and right. Bad things need to happen for a climax to happen, right? Like, right. I've never enjoyed like just coming in and kicking the total ass out of the campaign. It's like, if you didn't almost die somewhere or something bad happened, like, are you really like having fun,
I believe if you look in the 2E channel, my son constantly talks of how happy he was with the battle with the Fly Queen. I mean, maybe I get a little tired of it. I hope you folks enjoy it, but it just shows that you have to have a real fight, and he's got that overbuilt character he's so proud of, but because something stood up to him, that will always be his favorite scene.
Yeah.
Well, in the lethality section of the very chapter we're talking about here, they say basically, if you don't burn through all your resources finishing the adventure, then you didn't try hard enough. So it's there in the book.
Right.
Well said, sir. Well said.
Be tough. Well said, Tom.
Hey, Ben, speaking of which, like during the Octagon scene, did you like almost kill the players with those hellhounds?
Yeah. No, one of my characters in our podcast, he literally almost died, and they're kind of looking at me like, you're not gonna do it, right? And I'm kind of like, dude, I'm gonna fucking do this. But
did I hear right? Did they have quickness of 16? Like, isn't that insane?
Yeah, I mean, but that's the stat of a hellhound. I went through the paranormal animals of North America book, and the hellhounds have a quickness of 16. Man, they're bad.
What's the highest quickness a character can have at character generation?
Whatever I think the elf is the quickest. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. 8 maybe, like in care gen. I think it's 8.
Yeah. So,
I don't want to push my glasses up and nerd out, but I'm sure there's some horrible BioWare cyberware combination that gives you the same.
Perhaps. I'm sure there's a companion rule somewhere that expands on it.
So if you started with an elf, you maxed out their quickness, and then you essentially got them wired 3, which would give them a +6. You could have 13.
I thought there was a cap, though.
The way I always played it was that the cap included all that. Like the cap was the cap. You could do any cyberware or whatever, but the cap was, it could get you up to that cap. So you could save yourself on the attribute points and get yourself up to 8 with cyberware if you wanted to, and spend those points somewhere else. But 8 was the cap. But that was the way I played it. That's how I read the rules. But
it could be. I think it could be argued that that's what the rules are. It depends on. The people I play with would be like, well, that's the most you can get out of it naturally. But if you add cyberware on top of it, but I think you could argue either way, really.
You're telling me that your table did something different than mine? You want me to accept that as an answer?
Hold on. I kind of Associated Press.
I'm gonna make my boilerplate intro here for the YouTube channel. Thanks everybody for showing up for this behind the scenes edition, the 6th session. We're covering the behind the scenes chapter of the 2E rulebooks. So thank you guys for showing up. And you don't have to all be like, thanks for having me, but that would be nice.
Oh, thanks, dude. This is amazing.
Yes.
I didn't even have to beg for that. No, I'm just kidding.
Where am I again?
Where's Tom?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I was reading this section and I've read it a million times. I feel like this is like the most important chapter in the book, honestly, because it's like you can read all the rest of it, but it's like you need to read this shit to really understand that, like you said. I mean, it's funny that it's further into the book, but like Noyce, you're just talking about how every RPG book talks about how the rules are just guidelines, and that you can take a little here or change a few things here and make it work for your table. Like this chapter is like every single section in this book, in this chapter, basically starts with that. And It's very comforting, especially for someone like me. I came into Shadowrun late in life, and I knew the game world really well my whole life, but I never played the tabletop game. It was this boogeyman, like this really hard game everyone says don't play. And so I was afraid I was going to get shit wrong. And I feel like this chapter was like, we're good, man. You're good. You could do this.
But, even I'll say this. My first experience with someone fast ascent to run the game, I was at a con. Mind you, it was first ed, not second, because I'm ancient. But, there are some DMs that are disappointed if the players don't know the rules 100% accurately. I remember being a teenager and being scolded by the GM who was sent because our group didn't have the first ed rules 100% correct. And even with second ed, you can read it a dozen times and we'd all argue about what's correct. So it's good to be flexible as the player too.
Yeah, totally. And that was... Oh, go ahead, Ghost, please.
Like, and the important thing, it's like, how does the GM want to run things? And there's a little bit of like a leeway as to like, because players have to be a part of it, but like, if you can play with 2 different GMs, they could run things totally differently than each other, and they can still both be good GMs and provide a good experience. It's really GM dependent.
Totally. And I think somewhere in here it talks about how the skill difficulty chart, I can't remember exactly what it's called. Like in the beginning of the book, it just gives you sort of baseline numbers for what is average and what is difficult and what is extremely difficult. Like somewhere in this chapter, I wish I wrote it down, but it talks about how like you can always defer to that. Like you can go through these social skill table rules, or you could just be like, it's an extremely hard thing you're trying to convince this person to do. I'll just go with that number. It's like, it's up to you as a GM to like decide whether, I feel like if you had a face in your group, you'd probably want to use the social skill table because you're going to want to add as many modifiers as you can to like balance out that challenge or something, but it's up to you.
Well, I like basically the social skill stuff at the beginning of the chapter is, like, it also is kind of a framework you can use to extrapolate to all skill use. Like basically that same procedure is usable for everything. You just say, okay, so I'm gonna the vehicle operation skill. The table's different, but the text of the explanation of how you use the vehicle is basically the same. So I love the framework. I love the way that everything in this game kind of works the same way with adjustments for the context, but like if you know how to use one of the mechanisms in the game, you kind of have a leg up on everything.
That's a really good point. Like I feel like that's how I play by. I joke around. I don't play by theater of the mind. I play by seat of the pants. And I'll be like, oh shit, like this person's doing something that I can't think of the table I need to be referring to right at the moment. But you're right. Like I use the skill web all the time, and it's basically the same framework. Yeah. Or you can be like, you're right. Like you could just use like, okay, the base target number is 4. And I'll do an opposed roll, and I'm gonna start adding these modifiers to each party. And I usually resolve things on the fly like that. And it's like, you're right. Like once you can really pull them and use them in any way. They're kind of all the same, just different wording or slightly different numbers in different places. But.
And it does work. Like it goes in increments of +2 for the most part. So like you can, without looking at the table, say the player's like, why is it +6? You're like, because he's really fucking pissed at you. So it's +6. That's how it works.
Right. And like these stats helped me bring my current players, some of whom are not longtime Shadowrun players, into the color. So, they're going to negotiate for a better price, right? And that's a social skill. And they'll learn like, hey, this guy came in hostile. Wait, hold on. Like then they get suspicious, right? So this fixer came in hostile or almost acting like an enemy. And then they go, what can we do to make this deal work for them too? And they'll go and do this side research on the person, right? And then we know this is advantageous to them. And I love that because it makes them build a whole story to get the modifiers rather than just like, I roll 16 dice. I am looking for their willpower -1 because I have natural aptitude negotiation.
Right. You are mechanically obligated to.
Yes. That doesn't fly at my table. I wish my players were here so they could all chuckle. I often say, if you want to run a game like that, I'll show up to your game and I'll run it for you, but don't run mine.
I just made that joke with the troll in my game. She was like, I'm going to have my gang show up. And I'm like on the phone. She just did something like kind of stupid that kind of pissed them off. And I was like arguing with her. And then finally she's like, you have to show up. And I started laughing like, you're mechanically obligated to be here. And it's true. It was like, he was right. I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. They're going to show up. You pissed them off a little bit, but you rolled, and this many are going to show up. Don't worry. We're just flavoring
it. There's also
resentfully, they'll show up.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also the idea that like, no matter how well you roll, like how hard is it going to be to convince the troll to like jump off the 70th floor building? It's like, I mean, you can be good at negotiation, but like, there's no way where like just throwing yourselves off the roof is be considered like feasible, no matter how like charismatic you are.
Right. You can make that target number 40. That's what I do.
Yeah,
and like, if technically possible, maybe, but not gonna happen.
If the gang shows up pissed off, it's almost worse than if they didn't show up at all.
Right, exactly. Exactly. They could get you guys all killed or get themselves killed, and then you just lost some of your gang members.
How much does it cost for that gang again?
I can't. Let me find out. The gang was. I know that followers are $200,000, which is fucking awesome. That's so much money. Let's see.
$50,000.
$50,000. Yep.
Nice.
$50,000. Not chump change. And you only have a finite number of them too, so you get them arrested or killed or something, and
It's kind of like the original video games, right? You go out and like hire your crew, and you're like, oh shit, I just killed some, you know?
Oh, that
all
was
that
the
money
worst.
out the window.
They were so expensive.
So how does the like, can you recruit people into your gang? Like, after a while?
Yeah, it leaves the rules open. Basically, there's rules for purchasing them at character generation, but then after that, it's like it kind of is like it's up to the GM to like make that a challenge, or they're gonna have to RP their asses off to gain them. You know what I mean? I think I would still charge for them. That's what I do in my game. I'm like, this is gonna cost this much money. On top of that, just because otherwise it's like kind of broke. They could just wait and not buy them at the beginning of the game, and then be like, hey, I'm just gonna wait with someone, which someone did in my game. It's like I got followers now, but he's got that. Well, that's debt. He doesn't know it yet, but there's debt there.
There's also like you can make that an adventure. Like if your gang's number of members are getting thin, you make essentially a story out of like, we're gonna do a recruiting drive. Right. We're gonna go into the lands. We're gonna find everybody who's starving. We're gonna give them food. We're gonna them all. They're gonna be part of the gang, and we're gonna convince them this is their life now.
That's what I love about. I mean, I guess you can do that with everything I gush about Shadowrun. I suppose you could do in every RPG, but I think what Shadowrun does really well is that it makes those things sort of the forefront of the game loop, if that makes sense. Like, okay, yeah, you're gonna go on a run, but the legwork, how you do the run, is just as important. So if you need to have a certain car, we're gonna get an ambulance to break into this place and pretend we're emergency personnel or something. It's like, okay, you got to go steal that van, and you could make that into a mission before the mission even starts. And so now, to me, that's just such a much more fun way of like playing or you could just roll for it too. But it gives you that option.
It all depends on how tired my table is. I'm gonna say that. That's what I recommend to everyone. Is you can tell that game night everybody's had a shite week at work. You just recommend rolling, because the last thing you want people to do is to stress out and work hard when they're already dead.
Right. Yeah. That is true.
We are doing this for fun, so.
Yeah, exactly. That's I was laughing. So one of my last session, they told me just beforehand. They were like, "Hey, we're not gonna be available for a few weeks. Can we do it tonight?" And I'm like, "Oh shit!" So I'm like, "Okay," and I grabbed like sprawl sites. And I grabbed, I'm trying to think of what else I grabbed.
Your balls?
My balls, yeah. I hefted my huge balls over my shoulder. I went to work, and I just by the time I got home, I had like a session. I figured out I brought my contacts book. I just built a session out of it. I kind of knew what I wanted to do beforehand, but I had no idea what the map was going to be.
Pink Fohawk is in the same camp I am, but hasn't said it. That was a promo for Sprawl Sites, which is the best book. You can do everything with it. Random adventures, map sites, characters. It's all in there. Please buy your used copy of Sprawl Sites when you see it.
I couldn't recommend it more. I will say my favorite source book to date is the Seattle source book, but the most practical, Sprawl Sites, man. I don't know how I would have done that. I had 2 hours really to just crank and create a session. And I just randomly rolled shit, and it just made a session for me. And you could do it on the fly, too.
Yeah, and it was an even bigger deal in 1995 when you couldn't Google floor plans for buildings.
Damn straight.
Right.
Damn straight.
1995, you couldn't be well, what's a warehouse floor plan? And now I can Google up the floor plan for the Seattle Convention Center and send the Shadowrunners into it.
Yeah.
Back then, I'd be well, what is closest in Sprawl Sites?
Right. I know, I'll put 5 banks next to each other.
Yeah, they'll just be contiguous banks, and that's the convention.
Bank, post office.
5 banks, 5 Starbucks. Is it really that far from reality?
That's true. That is true. It's like strip mall. You got to think strip mall.
Yeah.
It's so true. But then what's really funny, the end of my story is that they didn't do any of it. After all that, they refused to go. They were like, just make this. Can we just get to the action? Can we just do an action one fast? We don't have much time. I'm like, sure. And then they fucked around the whole night, and it was a great time, but it was just funny. I was like, you guys, they're the ultimate punks. They're fucking punk rock. They will not do even what they told me they're going to do. I feel like, and there's also like there's random tables in this as well. In the behind the scenes section, there's things that you can like the quick matrix section. There's also obviously the racism table, like the famous racism table.
And a lot of these, these tables are about social interaction, and I think that's something you kind of touched on, and I think is really different about Shadowrun. One of the things that's different about Shadowrun is that when you're creating a character, you pick contacts, and these are people you know, they're friends. They make you have friends when your character is created. And then they give you rules and say, here's how you convince people to do things. So much of the game is actually just sort of there helping you come up with ways to manage social situations, which I think, that's usually not woven into the rule system for most role-playing games. They're like, yeah, you have to know how to kill someone, and then the rest of it you can just figure out. And that means that you actually spend most of the game running around just killing people, because that's what you have stats for. So Shadowrun changes that a bit. Like, I forgot there were language skill rules in 2nd edition, because in 3rd edition it's so explicit, and in 2nd edition there's it's a comment at the very end of the skill chapter, oh, by the way, you have language skills. And then in the behind the scenes, there's actually a section where it's like, here's how you make sure that you can communicate concepts to people in other languages, and here's how you use your language skills.
On the same token, I was reading the use knowledge skills trying to prepare for tonight, and I made a false statement, I know, to myself, but I'll admit it. I said, nobody has any fragging knowledge skills. This is bullshit, right? This is bulldrek. So then I actually started going through the characters, and what I realized, the Decker has physical sciences 4, not the elf Decker, but the human one. And that's good because elves suck. But then the Wage may test psychology, and the Merc has military theory. And I want to say that's got to be just a knowledge or theory skill in the base book, right? This is before small unit tactics and all that jazz. And I was like, how did I never notice this, right? There was example knowledge skills. I was ready to attack this, but no, it was built in from the start.
Well, and I was thinking about this, like when we were going through the skills chapter, I was surprised to realize that the sociology skill is actually if you drill down, it's a history skill more than it is a social science skill. It's like the sub skills, the specializations are things like history of X and that sort of thing. And that's something that probably several players over the years have had the sociology skill just because they thought it would be neat when they made their character. And I made them roll intelligence when they were trying to figure out the history of something. And I was like, oh, they probably had a skill for that, huh? In retrospect.
I would have played it your way too, though, probably.
I just sort of assumed sociology would be more academic of a skill, more like the class that you take in college, and less like a general, anthropology skill.
Right. What I also love about Shadowrun, besides everything, is that I love that it's not a kill someone and loot them, kind of game. It's
I'm holding my hand up. I'm holding my hand up and flipping it side to side. It can be too, especially in the original adventures.
It can be, but I feel like here's why it's discouraged. It's like, okay, cool. We're going to figure out availability. We're going to figure out, you need to find your fence. We're going to figure out what it becomes a huge pain in the ass to fence that loot. It's not like I got a gem off a dude. I'm going to go to this store in this village and sell it now. It's what's that?
He's like in a normal D&D game, you just kill a bunch of people, take their loot into town, go into a shop, and see how much you can sell for.
Right.
If you do that in Shadowrun, you'll probably get flagged down. Next thing you know, Lone Star is kind of coming to ask you questions like why you have all these obviously stolen stuff.
Right. There's a lot for the GM to play with there.
You have to find someone that is willing to deal with stolen loot, and then they're probably going to mark it way down, and then doesn't mean they're going to be willing to buy it and or be able to sell it.
I like to back up even further than that. You guys are a step ahead. It's okay, you just took out another Shadowrunner team. They're all wearing backpacks full of gear, and so are you. Like, you ever try grabbing a second backpack and a bunch of other gear and like throwing it on yourself?
Yeah,
you should
that's
totally
true.
punish them for walking wrong with that. You know, like now you have 2 backpacks and you're carrying 3 rifles.
Right.
Well, how handy is that once you get on the street level, right? That's the thing. Like, make it realistic, you know?
Let's flip to the hauling the load chapter.
I just dragged my characters through Eye of the Eagle, and first of all, most terrible hard combat in any pre-published adventure. I'm just say that right now. But when the survivors looted the enemy, they were like, "Sweet spell focuses," and then the mages had to explain, "You don't get to use those. You have to bond to them with karma." You could see everybody go to sad face.
Right. Sweet Ares Predator. Yeah, that was linked to his specific fingerprint, so that also is a brick. It's just funny that you could fuck with them. But I mean, what's cool is, like, to me, I feel like it gives you a lot of flexibility. Like D&D, I feel like that's the point of the game. Like, why would you punish them for picking up a jewel off a dude they beheaded? Like, the point is to get loot and treasure and adventure and do that kind of shit. Like, this is about the job. So it doesn't really, professionals wouldn't be going around fucking emptying the wallets of everyone they shoot. You know, they're trying to get through the mission so they can go and get the payday at the end of it. And I feel like it kind of does a good job of, like, putting these mechanics here that, like, if they, let's say they do pick up like a fucking, you know, cyber deck, you know, full of, like, just a Excalibur with all these different programs on it, these data chips that have all this expensive data in it that you could sell, pay data. It's like, okay, now you got to find a fence for that. And that's totally fine. You can do that. But it's kind of, you're kind of bringing heat on yourself. Yeah.
Put it up.
That's one of the things I find I really struggle with Shadowrun, though, is all the cheap GMs that won't pay their runners. They're like, well, $3,000 or $4,000 for a run isn't more than enough. And I'm like, bullcrap.
Well, that depends on.
How are they going to pay their rent? And
that depends on, like, how often missions are, how, like, much time going to the missions, and how many of them you put in a month. Like,
And how often my players spend a month in dock wagon healing.
Right, because, like, let's say you get paid $2,000 for a mission, but you can, like, do a mission a night because they're just cheap, easy missions. Yeah, like, by the end of the week, you get $10,000, and then, like, you know, by the end of the month, like, you get, like, something like $40,000. It's like,
you can still
like, you know,
make Orichalcum and make more money, though.
Right, but, like, those sorts of missions are going to be, like, you know, easy missions. Typically, like, Shadowruns, you don't just kind of, like, show up, shoot the guy, take the stuff, and leave. You have to do all the legwork, which can take several days, sometimes even weeks. You have to, like, research the plan. You have to, like, sometimes you have to, like, after you do all the legwork and you do all the research, you figure out that in order to get this, you need to get this, like, you know, MacGuffin from a different place. And now you have to plan a run for this different place so you can get, like, the thing that will let you into the, like, place you actually want to get in. And then all of this adds up to, like, you know, also trying to, like, recuperate from a mission. Because, like, if you get shot up and stuff, like, it's going to take, like, a while to recover. So you can't just be paid less than it takes for you to, like, go forward.
Right. 2 nights in the hospital is $2,000. 2,000 new yen.
Right.
So, like, your mission. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to point out it's a different chapter in a different book, but if you use the Shadowrun companion for rules for how long it takes to train, half your month is spent, like, upping your attributes and your skills. So you lose that time. You can't be making money while you're training your Aikido, for example.
Yes, which is hard training. Is you can watch any Steven Seagal video and see.
Yeah, it takes a whole montage.
Speaking of loot,
Man, I feel like my ears are under siege.
Speaking of loot, before we move on, isn't, like, pay data the quintessential, like, Shadowrun loot?
It is, but it's most likely going to be by the chart hot data, right? Like so we have a really competent decker, and it's one of the things that's in this version. Pay data is definitely like a really good way to make money, but it's one of the reasons I love including Virtual Realities 2.0. There's a mechanism to make pay data far less profitable.
Interesting.
Well, and you got to have a decker. Like, basically, you can't just roll into a corporate headquarters and be like, I'm just gonna grab this pay data off the desk and walk out.
Also, sometimes they'll print things up.
Not really how it
like,
works.
you know, well, like sometimes it's virtual, but like, what prevents you from like, you know, while you're in the CEO's office and like, you know, the decker's trying to hack to the thing, you go through his desk, maybe you find a wall safe or something, and then steal some like physical files from there. I know as like, you know, the future they don't tend to print things off as much, but like, you know, a hard copy is unhackable.
I just want to say I believe that happens in physical, to be exact.
What do you mean physical?
There's the first adventure of Harlequin. You steal from a CEO's bank vault a physical copy of a book before it's been published.
Yeah, it's a manuscript written by an ancient elf, so he doesn't save his stuff on data chips.
So yes, the game includes examples of just that.
So that, or like, you know, let's say you take out what seems to be the security captain, you go through his pockets, find some data chips, like, you know, that could contain pay data. You don't necessarily have to, like, you know, no pay data unless you guys are going to spend like 30 minutes to like an hour and a half waiting for the hacker to blow through ice.
Valid. And also like security keys, like badges for facilities, those are also to the right person worth quite a bit. So
passcodes, baby. Flash the code, pass the node. They're invaluable.
Well played, sir. Well played.
My favorite rhyme in the entire book. I think it might be the only one, but it's my favorite one either way. Yeah, and here's the thing. Also with pricing, I also felt like the pricing of runs were pretty cheap. I think Shadowrun Companion was where they gave examples of how much you charge for a run, and they're really low for me. Anyway, I was like, wow, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it was like 10 or 15 grand for like a fucking assassination. And I'm like, really?
10 or 15 to be split amongst however many players there are.
Right.
So there's like 10 or 15 grand for an assassination. Are you killing like some hobo or something?
I think it was like, I think it mentioned in there somewhere, like if it's a super high profile target, obviously it'd be more. But like that's just like a boilerplate like assassination gig of some no-name corp person that means something to corpse, but not the general public or something. It'd probably be 15
right,
grand.
But like, you know, if you're assassinating someone that's like, you know, not just like a sinless hobo, like, you know,
I mean, I agree.
Draw some form of heat. Like a sinless hobo, I mean, like, all right, like, you know, put down $1,000 and then we'll go, like, you know, take care of the
just
guy.
Just do that for
like,
fun.
You know?
Just do that for kicks, right?
Right. But like,
we've all had that player though.
Oh, absolutely.
But like,
murder
you know,
hobo.
When we're talking about like, you know, like you can't just walk up to him, shoot him, and then like, you know, walk away without anyone caring. But at the minimum, like the cops are gonna like open up a file or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the thing. If someone's worth hiring someone to kill, then they're worth something, right, to somebody. So it's like I always equate it to 80s inflation. Like maybe 15 grand was the going rate for assassinations in the 80s. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably part of it too, is that like the prices on things in Shadowrun are comparable, if a little bit high, but comparable to what you thought was a lot of money in dollars in the 80s.
Yeah.
Somebody's like $15,000. It's so much money, and then by today's standards, you're like, that's
right. I'm gonna go buy a house.
That's a lot, but you're not gonna buy much with that.
Right.
Yeah, this is where it gets into, I guess, sort of an artistic choice, though, because depending on which game group I'm running for, we can run, this is going to sound far-fetched, but this sort of dystopian world where no matter what you do, you don't make enough to get by, and the system always wins. Right. And even though you're going outside to break the law, you still can't afford to get healed. There's no universal health care. These are all mythical things, right? I'm just talking about mythical things.
You have a wild imagination.
I know. I got to reel it in some, but other times we make it a happy-go-lucky game too.
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's like, and it's like you said, it's a dystopian future. Like maybe this is happening all the fucking time. Like obviously, shadowrunning is a profession. Like it's maybe it is they're knocking off corporate, you know, suits left and right. So it is 15 grand because the demand is there's so many happening.
I mean, it's contracting, right? So you do a bunch of jobs in March, and then you take April off, and
or
you know
the jobs just dry out by April, so that you have to kind of like, you know, dig around and look for shit to do because you still have to pay rent.
Yeah, no, that's
Lifestyle.
the contracting joke. The contracting joke is that when you're a contractor, you never stop looking for work because you're always sure that tomorrow it's not going to be there anymore. So you're like, there's never a vacation. Right. You're always like, you know what? I know that I have work through the end of the month, but what about next month? Right. And then when you have next month lined up, you're like, yeah, I know I have work next month, but what if it falls through? I need a backup. So
15 grand, I'll take it.
Yeah. Never know.
Never know.
But at the same time, also that the original adventures expected you to loot. I don't know anything past second on this. I can't make a hard claim, but like we've started with Silver Angel, and Silver Angel is very upfront that they expect you to loot and go forward. And I think it changed over time, but I think part of the low pay rates was, yeah, you're going to get looted material. Yes, sell it at 10% value or something, but you're going to get looted material, and that's part of the pay too.
Right,
and pull that guy's arm off and sell it to a street dog. It'll be fine.
If you go into a like a corporate site, and like you're paid to like grab some files, but at the same time, like you just kind of like do a bunch of other shit, loot a bunch of things, and escape. Then the corp's looking at like, okay, we got hit like last night, but what did they do? Like it's harder to track down exactly what your objectives was. Unless you spray painting on the walls, if you do a bunch of stuff, than if you just do like the one thing.
It's true.
It's true.
Unless your damn employer says, plant this in the data center, but do not take anything else. Ignore all of the pay data. Screw you,
sure, but that's a special kind of run. And those are fun if they're the exception, not the rule.
100% agree. If the exception, not the rule. Totally agree.
So what you're saying is that you're a better Shadowrunner if you're chaotic and you're not professional and you just make a big mess when you go in there, because then they don't know why you were there.
I'm keeping my voice level, but I just want to say, yeehaw.
So keep in mind, like corporate types. Sometimes they want a certain level of professionalism, but like other times, like they're gonna go whoever the cheapest bidder is that they feel can still complete the job.
I love that it's like I'm just covering my tracks, and then
I think you just explained how my team gets hired. I am going to remember it's the cheapest bidder who might be able to do the job.
There you go. Just cover my tracks, people. Then you cut to Chunk from Goonies, and you're pulling pearls out of his mouth, or mouth. They're just pulling a bunch of jewels out of his mouth, and they get caught. Where the hell did you get all this shit? You also have to sell it afterwards. I mean, it boils all back down to this chapter where it's like, okay, cool, yeah, you stole a bunch of shit from the office and they're not able to easily pinpoint what you were exactly there for, but now you got to sell this shit, and it's hot loot if they're looking for it. So at a certain point, it's like, do you want to risk that heat to get a little more money off the top if you've achieved your mission and you got paid? And you've also thrown them off your scent because you stole a bunch of shit. It's almost like you don't want to sell that shit because you kind of want to like throw it in a river somewhere and like take your money and walk away.
Is it in this edition where there's rules like the more you like ask around about stuff or the more you like sell things, like the risk goes up and up that somebody's gonna like squeal?
I don't think it's in this particular chapter we've read, but in many of the adventures, the more you ask around about bad guy foo, there's a thing for like how many times you roll, you add to a threshold. Like it's almost like a security chief. Somewhere
in the fencing. I'm pretty sure somewhere in the fencing, the loot section, they say that the more times you fail to sell your loot, the harder it gets to sell. There's a dice roll you make. So
right. I don't think there's a mechanic in the book that cranks up the pressure on getting caught or anything, but it does make it harder to sell.
It says at the end of each day, the game master rolls a number of dice equals day spent searching, and with a target number of 6. Even 1/6 means the bad guys are on to them.
There we go.
They will hunt them down. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm spoiled. I'm spoiled, and in hell, our group has a dedicated face, and he's so goddamn good he doesn't fail. So I totally forgotten about that role.
Wow. Okay. Well, there you go.
So there is one thing in this chapter that I wanted to kind of bring up before we go way out of the selling stuff and social section of the chapter is the perception check. Like that's the one thing that like there isn't a skill for anything. You just roll intelligence to notice things.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I kind of love about this, the perception check, is that like players who make physical characters will often be like, well, I'm not gonna waste points on charisma and intelligence. And then you walk they go into the facility and you're like, okay, so everybody roll a perception check. See if you find something. And they're like, I have 2 dice.
Right.
Wow, yours have 2?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
but that's the thing. Like, what I love about that is that gives that quote unquote weaker character a reason, a place where they're on the site, they're shining a little bit, and it also makes people who make more physical characters wince a little every time they're asked to like observe their surroundings.
Well, this being a game where heists are like common, I just don't see a lot of players kind of like stick as a group. Like it's not D&D where you never split the party, because like you know, face it, like well the face might be able to like just social engineer his way in. It's gonna be a lot harder to do the same thing with a troll, especially if you're like going somewhere where trolls aren't welcome.
Right.
So like you're gonna have to find an alternate way of letting this guy in. Maybe he's gonna wait by a fire escape sort of thing until like someone can pop the door for him. But like you're not just kind of like walking around as a group of 4 people and then just putting the person on point that's able to deal with the problem.
Right. It's not as easy to get away with a low intelligence when like basically you might be the only one in the scene. Because in Shadowrun, your characters go in different directions for legwork. They go in different directions to get in the building, as you point out, getting in different ways because of what they look like. And your character will often find themselves in a place where they're like, I am the only one here who can make this perception check, and I have 2 dice.
Right.
And that means that people do actually have to put points in intelligence,
or just be okay with what
I actually wish it were a skill. I wish it were a skill in 2E. I let players take it, and I'll explain. By the end of 2E, there's aura reading, and we all know what aura reading is. It's astral perception as a skill. And because I run many of my home written adventures basically as detective noir novels, thank you, Universal Brotherhood, for imprinting me for life. Because they are run as detective noir novels, detectives have to notice stuff. And I actually would think that in most of the the first and second generated adventures, first and second edition, adventures, you'll see you have to make perception checks to move things along. It is a fantastic skill. Who you know and what you see is what my main players will say are my games. If you don't know enough context and you don't see enough, you're just going to have to shoot everything till you get killed.
Yeah. That's an interesting point you make about aura reading too, because aura reading is definitely a skill, and it's a perception skill just in magic.
Right. It's just aura, but magic people get it only. Magic bias.
Where is that? Is that in Grimoire?
I think it's in Magic in 2057.
That's a book I don't have.
Did I just read the whole title from memory?
You definitely did. And I was impressed, sir.
I mean, it's in 2057, so in 2053, you don't have aura reading. That's
right.
Yeah.
So how'd you handle that before? You just handled intelligence?
Intelligence before. But I think like third ed gave us the perception skill. I'm not trying to praise third ed. This is just a right choice.
Get out.
Okay, fine. But no, I love having a detective character, and the detective character and I mean in my game, because I wind up running. No one will fucking run games for me. Pardon my language. But no one will fragging run games for me. And so when I have a detective character and the guy says, I need a look around and find stuff skill, I'm like, we'll just put it perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would put it as like for a detective, it feels like investigation would be the right name for the skill. But
that would be a good name too. I agree.
Right.
But since I know that I can run third modules and it's just called perception, there, it makes my life easy.
Yeah.
The thing with the detective playstyle, unlike a lot of the other things you can do, it's not there's not a lot of support for it. Just like okay, you can do perception checks. Okay, you're good at that one thing. What else? It's like, in order to make a given playstyle like well supported, you need more than one skill. to pick up. You need something like, regular perception, and then forensics, and then maybe like, a bunch of other knowledge.
I totally agree. I mean, if you look at the detective here, right? He's got negotiation, which I think is classic detective noir. He's got 2 etiquettes, not 1, folks, but 2. He's got a car skill because he's got to drive around this 50 Chevy. It's required by law.
Slide over the hood.
And slide over the hood. It's the only one old enough and strong enough for him to slide over the hood. I think you can make a well-rounded detective character, but I think the way this one is right here, I just go like, okay, so he's too slow to ever work in combat, and everyone else duplicates his skills.
I love the detective. I'll die by. I love the detective archetype. What I would do is I'm with you. I think that's where knowledge skills comes in, and I love how flexible knowledge skills are. That the rules make it. You can basically make any. We have fucking method acting as a knowledge skill in my game. It's just something that you can just you want ballistics. You want to know like forensics. You want to know like make those knowledge skills.
I also want his tie. Skills. Before I forget, I want his tie.
It's a great tie.
You can make like forensics a knowledge skill, but I think forensics should just be its own separate skill, because like perception check is like way different. Like just seeing or hearing things is just way different than like being able to like properly collect forensic evidence.
True, but then you have all this cyberware at your disposal or magic. It's like you can. What I like about it is it's like the skills don't necessarily have to completely dictate what a detective can and can't do. It can also be the gear he has, or he could have spirits that fucking search for things. That's a power they have, locating object or spells. So there's a lot of ways to do it. I feel like, but
then again, if
there's an investigation skill, you have a million of the same kind of detective. I feel like everyone grabs the same skills.
Right. But the thing is, you need different skills so that people can take one or more of the skills to fulfill the role. It's like if you played a face and then there was just one like face skill. There was like, it's not negotiating, like, combination of negotiation, con, and like intimidation, and everything that's charisma is just like this skill. Then like, everyone can be a face while doing their like other stuff at the same time. It takes away from someone who wants to play a dedicated face.
I agree. I mean, I think that's what I like about the flexibility of knowledge skills and etiquette skills that you can and specializations. Like it gives you that. I would allow like a concentration or specialization on like a intelligence check. Like I'd make it like a knowledge skill that we use almost like a concentration. Yeah. Like I'm gonna do a perception check, but in this instance where I'm searching for, I don't know, forensic evidence, like I can use this knowledge skill. I'm with you though. I mean, I think it's not as it's definitely something you have to like work out with your GM. It's not like baked into like the core rules where it's obvious from the beginning. So I do agree there.
I think I have been convinced that like there's a place for perception checks being broken up into skills. So because like that's the thing. If you are good at for instance forensic evidence gathering, you're going to be better at seeing stuff that's out of place than someone who just walks into the room and they're just like, yeah, this room looks pretty messy.
well, this goes all the way back to what we were first talking about, though. To me, what I like about this game is it forces that conversation. Like a player could make that case. I'm a detective. Yeah. What am I searching for? I'm using my perception check. Can I get, a -2 modifier because I look for this shit? And I'd probably allow it. You could go back to that table you were talking about, Noish. You can look at that social skills table, and I could look at it and go, yeah, okay, I'll subtract 2 from this target number. Or I like that it lets you have that conversation and dialogue and try to like work out how this is going to work with your character, as opposed to just like point to the skill on my page. Now give me that fucking target number because I bought this skill.
There's a whole section in this chapter on why you don't necessarily reveal target numbers.
It's a good rule to have. Yep. I'm pretty. I don't know what the percentage is that I share. I share it usually.
I share it usually too, but when it's not a combat scene, when we're building the tension and the discovery, then it's like, hey, I need everybody to make a perception check, and they all give me numbers, and they stare at me. I'm like, oh, I'll tell you when I want to tell you.
Right. Impose some dread on that party.
Yeah, there are times when having the target number as the players having the target number is valuable, and there are times when it isn't. Because there are times when if the target number is that astronomically large because they're trying to do something really complex, and you're like, okay, so you add this on, you add this on, you add this on, and you add this on, and you have a 17. That's your target number. The player will then have a sense of this shit. This work is crazy. Yeah.
Right.
Whereas if it's an 8, whatever, they miss the target number. So there are those times where if you know your target number is 17, you're like, well, we're gonna see what happens then.
Especially with karma dice too. Like you could, it's like, oh, I before I roll, I want to add some karma to this.
Yeah.
You know, it's a 17. I'm gonna need some help.
I prefer when they say, I'm going to cast Mana Ball at them, and then they go to roll, and like, what are my target numbers? And I'm like, well, since they have shielding from their mage, it's a 9. And then you just see them go, oh, fuck. But see, I gave them the target number.
Yeah.
And you can like read their mind that they're saying like geek the mage, like instantly in their minds. That's how you teach them.
Right. It's like, it's good to give out the target number when it makes the players nervous. And if it doesn't make them nervous, then you don't need to tell them.
Exactly. It's the sadistic way. Yes, Tzaz is bringing up diseases and toxins. That's a fun little section. Someone mentioned, like, I can't wait till you guys get to that section. I don't know who it was, but someone said that earlier. And I was like, huh. So I paid particular attention to it this time.
I do agree it's an odd place, but there's a bunch of odd stuff back in this era of game publishing.
Yeah, this was kind of like the kitchen sink section, I feel like, where they just threw everything.
This was like everything they couldn't fit in another chapter specifically.
Ding, ding, ding. I mean, if you think about it, selling gear and buying gear should have all been one complete thing, but it's actually 2 separate subsections in this chapter.
Yeah.
So I think it is the kitchen sink, and that's just where it washed down because they didn't have it. And the gear section's not a good place for rules the way this one's designed, if you think about it. So just fit here.
Right.
Yeah, I love one of the things I think that works really well, like when I was going over this, is how having the damage monitor be like how you track diseases and poisons is kind of really like it's really intuitive, because if you take serious stun from getting sick, you're at +3 to do anything. So your character is actually wandering around, just sort of in a daze statistically, because they basically have the flu, or because they've been poisoned. And I think that it works really intuitively from a perspective of, illustrating how your character would have more difficulty if they were sick or poisoned, just because the way the damage tracks work. They lose efficiency as they take damage.
Yeah, and I love how relative it's all relative, right? It's like you're taking deadly stun. If your body roll doesn't knock that down, or you're taking it doesn't matter if you're a fucking troll with 10 body. Like if you don't pass that, you got deadly stun. So you're basically hospitalized.
Yeah.
I
also love the speed. They're like the Narcojet is instantaneous, but the Vitus is actually 12 hours. So you make your roll, and the GM goes, huh?
Okay.
You're like, but did I get sick? We'll see. 12 hours.
Right.
So this Vitas thing looks really familiar. Aerosol transmitted by close contact with an infected person you're sharing a confined space. Huh. It reminds me of something. I can't put it all together. I'm not that bright.
Again, you have a wild imagination.
Yeah,
I know, man. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all these fantastical elements to the game that don't really tie to real life in any way.
It is true. I do love the idea of like a Vitus like run in the vein of like the movie Cranked, where it's like they got Vitus, they have 12 hours to live, and
oh God, there's my next adventure.
Find the antidote.
I'm feeling it.
That's it. So you got 12 hours to find the antidote, man. I love that it's personally. I'm a bastard, and I kind of love that all the toxins are in the quote unquote GM only section that like players aren't gonna read. Because you can fuck with them with this stuff then. And
it's a little tricky because if you're a player and you pick up like there's a narcojet pistol that allows you to like shoot people with tranq, but it's not evident where you would find out what narcojet does from like the pistol. The pistol just says it has narcojet in it, and you're like, okay. It's because it's in this very infrequently trafficked chapter in the core book, so you'll never have to reproduce the rules anywhere else.
That is, that's just a funny. It's a wonky thing about I feel like books at this time too. But there's definitely a few of those in here. There's times where I'm like, well, that's so funny. I forget that all that information is not here. It's there,
right? Because I think the narcojet pistol is in the Street Samurai catalog, but there are no rules for narcojet in there. And if you go look in the gear section of the core book thinking, okay, so it must be there, there's nothing there.
Right.
Isn't it a drug?
You're like, okay, well, I guess it just sort of stuns them or something.
It sounds really cool, though.
I remember having that happen in one of my games at one point where we spent a very long time trying to figure out where the stats for narcojet were, and we never found them, and we just sort of made something up in the moment. And then I read them right here, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's where those are.
Kind of like in the core rule book, like my player wanted to have drones. I'm like, well, there's the price for the drone right there. And then we like spent like a half hour trying to find out how to use it. And I'm like, well, I guess we have no fucking idea.
There are no rules.
Skill, right? It's a driving skill. Close enough.
Yeah,
it's not a question. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not a question, but I do have a complaint about this chapter. And it's kind of hilarious. Have you ever noticed how ECM or ECCM has its own special sub-paragraph on everything? I wish Tom were here to answer why. It's hilarious. It's like a whole section of buying or selling or using, and then at the bottom, but for ECM/ECCM. And I feel like the narcojet rules are like that. You have to know that there's this special hidden section somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's somewhere in this chapter it talks about how you can add those stats to any gear that doesn't have them, and that basically determines how it mentions it in here somewhere. Where was it?
But I think that to Tisaw's
page 184 Ticino.
The point Tisa, I'm not sure how to pronounce Tisoz, but Tisaw's, somebody else can recommend a pronunciation. But to their point that the diseases and toxins in this chapter seem a little out of place, I would say, like, basically it feels like the toxins should be in the gear chapter. Got it. Tisaw's. Got it. But the diseases definitely belong in this chapter, and so it seems like they were like, well, there's only 2 toxins and they work kind of the same. Let's just put them all in one section. And so the toxins got stuck in a place where they didn't belong because they went with the diseases. That would be my sense of why they live here and not somewhere else.
Yeah, sometimes you can like kind of see the logic for why stuff like how gear, like the combat rules for gear is in the combat section, but then the price and sort of description is all in the gear section. It makes sense, I guess, when you do that mental gymnastics to figure out why they split it up, or why they wouldn't just repeat it twice, or just put it all in the gear section. Stuff like that is funny.
Yeah, like where you have to look up ranges in the combat section for any of your guns that you buy in the gear section.
And then you have to sit through an hour of the gun bunny at the table from real life going, what do you mean my sniper rifle only goes 400 meters? That's where I start shooting, Ramrod. I'm like, calm down. This is how the game works.
Yeah, the world has changed. Gravity is different in 2053 than it is in the 90s, and that's just how it is.
Yep.
That's heavy, man. That's heavy.
80s inflation. Everything got heavier too.
The magnetic field of the Earth, with the return of magic, really increased gravity. And
the Gaia
magnets,
sphere.
how do they work?
What's that magnetic metal or that magic metal? in this game?
Orichalcum?
Yeah, Orichalcum. It's a denser planet, man. There's Orichalcum.
Yep. Just everything's heavier. Bullets can't go as far.
That's how dwarves were made.
Oh, shite.
They just resist less of the gravity.
I don't know what the ECM. I know it's the electronic countermeasures versus electronic countermeasures.
It's just interesting how it's like, it's attached at the end of everything for buying, and you're like, how many people ever use that rule? Like, seriously, if your table used that for the ECCM on your armor, you let me know. You give me a call
Right.
and tell me how it added to the flavor of your table in 2E, because I missed it.
Made you so much sneakier.
It reminds me of that scene from the terrible movie, The Big Hit, with Mark Wahlberg, where they're like, he's like trying to call this person and do ransom. He's like, don't worry, I've got the scrambler. And then the other guy on the other end's like, I've got the scrambler. and there's this whole war back and forth. It's really funny. Sounds like a fun game to play that way.
So the section we come up to after diseases is the threat ratings, which I thought was really interesting. Is a really interesting mechanism too.
Yeah, I marked that down too as like, there's another great example of like, it gives you flexibility, because it's like, if you don't want to bother, I mean, it basically tells you not to bother going through character creation rules for NPCs, which you'd be crazy to do that.
Hi, I'm crazy.
You're crazy. But at least if you are crazy, there's rules for you too. And it tells you how to add on to the skills and stuff based on their experience. And then
I should also say, I have a 19-year-old adult son who's happy to make NPCs for me. So I give him a list and I go to work.
You could set up a Patreon so that we can just hire him to make our stuff,
I will totally do that.
Excellent.
If that's what you guys want. And he'd probably just do it.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, get him an Etsy page.
Like, I'm just looking for somebody to give me like a printout. Like, seriously, like I would pay him to give me like, I would give him like random, like I need this, and that. Just step them out for me. And if he did that, like I would pay him $5 a character.
So he and I argue all the time in the F32E help channel. So you can see us argue. You can hit him up.
I didn't realize he's your son, but it makes a lot more sense now. And it's really funny to me now. Talk about adversarial GM. I mean, you can't beat that.
Dad.
Shut up, Dad.
See, the best part is he knows better than to do that. That's the amazing part. The only thing that sucks is when he reads a rule and, maybe the rule's unclear to the rest of us who've played it for 30 years, but he's absolutely certain that it says foo equals bar. And finally I say, look, we only have 4 hours because we're old and we get tired. You want to argue with me in the Discord after? Great. But for now, we're running it my way. Let's argue after. And we've learned to move, like literally he'll type the argument in the Discord right then rather than take game time. So I'm a happy man.
But Dad, you're the only person I know that knows how to play Shadowrun. Like, that's right, son. That's right. That isn't changing anytime soon.
Get used to it.
Right. This game dies with me, son. It dies with me. Not if we can help it. Not if we can help it. We're changing minds.
But yeah, I really like the threat rating for, especially as a sort of basically where you have an NPC that you want to be more important, and maybe they came out of nowhere because they popped in, somebody did something that required you to grab an archetype and run with it, and you're like, well, this person should be better than just what's in the archetype, but I don't really want to fiddle around with the numbers. You just sort of jot down a threat rating, and I think that really, that works really well. It gives them a dice pool essentially.
Right.
They have a functionally a threat pool that they
have a built-in morale, which is super important to me.
Yeah.
People expect everyone to fight to the death, and I'm a rating 1. I see the bullets fly, I'm getting the frack at. I'm gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that section's good. Yeah, because normally it's always like everybody like fights to the death, and you just have a pile of bodies everywhere. Having people like say like, "Holy shit, I'm getting the fuck out of here" is awesome.
Yeah, right. And it's also something you like if you have players come to this game from say D&D. They actually, the first couple of times that as a game master I have their opponents flee because they've taken damage, they get confused because they're like, "Wait, yes. they're running away? They're not dead yet." I'm like, yeah, they don't want to be dead. They want to
do that.
I had I used to have players who, if any NPCs would try to run away, then they would feel compelled to chase them down to the end of the earth.
I blame D&D because in D&D, if they run away, it's because they have known backup to call.
Right. Well, that's precious experience getting away from me. He will not get away.
Experience points running away right now.
Right. That's my next level right there. He's not getting away.
Which is another point in like Shadowrun's favor. It's really cool that experience is awarded at the end of the campaign or like at the end of the session, and it's for everything that you did, not just killing stuff, right? So it incentivizes like storytelling, which I think is really cool. Whenever I play D&D, it's like we're always like looking forward for the next action scene because we're like looking to build up our experience points. Where here it's like you're building experience all the time.
Right.
When playing D&D, it's not so much the person are looking always for the next action scene. They're always looking like they'll go through a dungeon and like even if they succeeded what they had to do, they go out of their way to clear the whole thing. They have to go explore every room and then check everything and then move on. Like as opposed to Shadowrun, like if they get handed the win, they don't want to stick around and like risk getting caught or causing additional trouble.
Right.
Yeah, it feels much more alive. I find it's like it's not like you come back to the same areas. You have a neighborhood or your house or your contacts that you keep coming back to. It's like it feels more alive. You're actually like living in something that's interacting with you. Where I always felt like a tourist traveling the world in D&D. Like you rarely go back to the same place. You're always moving forward to a different part of the campaign, to a harder dungeon. And I love the downtime portion of Shadowrun where you're always coming back to something familiar and it might have slightly changed or whatnot, but you're going back to those characters that and I don't know, it just feels so much more alive to me.
Well, and if you're coming to a neighborhood where you shot things up, they're all pissed off at you too. So there's a history on there too.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say I like it in 2E. It feels like that in 2E, but when I started playing with people in 4E, they're like, "Oh no, we travel from place to place because we are hardcore criminals. We couldn't even go back home. I am just mercenary killman." And it was it was really hard, and I was shocked at every convention I went to that a lot of that came through. Whereas in my 2E, my characters are trying to restore a strip mall in an industrial neighborhood. And that was our last adventure of them trying to get businesses to come in. And I love that because that's high fantasy to imagine you can open a business and survive in the modern world.
Yeah, it feels less like you're these like band of like conquerors and more like you live in this world and you're like trying to scratch out just an existence. And it's you're punching up. I like the feel of that a lot more.
Well, it has a little bit, I think it has a little bit to do with the fact that in the first couple of editions of Shadowrun, even though they gave you information about other locations that weren't Seattle, everything was built around the idea that you were in Seattle and you were going to do everything in Seattle. And so it was a heavier lift to be like, okay, I'm going to run this in Denver. And as the game got more mature and more source books were made, there was a lot more material where you could like run every adventure in a different city. And so that made it more appealing because people are like, well, I have 20 books and I want to use all of them.
Well,
right.
There's some of that, but at the same time, like good Shadowrunners, like you can't negate the home ground advantage. Like if you know the city, when the cops are chasing you, if you're just taking random turns trying to lose them, you're gonna end up in a dead end or facing a police barrage. Where like if you know the place, then like it's not just like okay, take a random to shake them. Is like hey, take a left here, right here, go to the parking garage. We'll like come out the other side, and then because instead of just rolling like randomly, you can roll for like trying to orient yourself to like a workable plan. Yeah. And you also know people good luck trying to like get stuff done when you don't know anyone that's in the city. It's like
right.
Sure.
Yeah, because you're like, okay, we got to lay low. I know a person we can stay with, and you can't do that if you're new to town. Yeah.
Yep. I love that, by the way.
Yeah, for me, I've never been to Seattle, so for me, it might as well be Rivendell. For me, it's like wow, it's really cool. It's like how come? Why do you say that?
Different now. It's so different now. Someone earlier said something about I can grab maps of the Seattle Convention Center. And that is a hilarious joke in my group because I ran one of the missions that's given away free from early third ed, adjusted to second. And it's been the Seattle Convention Center has been remodeled not once but twice since that was published in the early 2000s. Seattle has been under so much change; it's not going to look at all like Shadowrun. I made the mistake of going.
I see.
Shadowrun Seattle is about as similar as like our 2020 is to Shadowrun 2020.
Yes, I mean it's not like the Supreme Court made a big decision so that corporations can run armed security. Fuck, how different was it again?
Yeah, yeah.
Wait, what?
You make a valid point. Different enough that the floor plan is different, but the buildings...
the floor plan's different. Yes, the buildings look a different color, and the floor plan's way different. So it's not worth going. That's what I was trying to say.
It's completely different.
I think I'd be more of the type like, oh, let me take a picture in front of the Space Needle. Let me go down to the waterfront. Let me, I don't think it would bother me that much.
I did all those, so yeah, they're fun.
I was interviewing for a job in Seattle, and the interviewer kept like talking about Seattle, and I felt like I knew it really well because I've been studying this game. And so she's like, I live over on Mercer Island, and you know anything about that? And I kept like telling myself,
Council?
do not say fucking Council Island, you idiot. Do not say it. I was like telling myself, like, do not blow this. I was like, no, what's that like?
I'm an idiot. I would have said Council Island. I'm like, I know all about Council Island.
That's really hard to get into.
You got to know somebody.
Right.
Hey, you might just get lucky and she might know what you're talking about, have a good laugh, and then,
That's true.
Yep.
I mean, I was able to keep my mouth shut. I've been on enough interviews to be like, just let them talk. And then when they ask you to talk. And it worked out. It worked out.
Pink Fohawk has corporate etiquette.
Yes. Well, interview specialization in interviews. But otherwise, no.
All right. So speaking of this rich world and the location and everything else, in the same chapter is a thing on creating adventures. And I have a question about the opposition section. And I wanted to know if anybody else does this. Does anybody else, when they think about the different sections in here, government, police, polo clubs, organized crime, does anybody else make like a mind map of how everybody, like whatever the MacGuffin that's being put on the street is? Does anybody else make a mind map and see how all the parties relate to each other during the adventure? Or am I just ADHDing my way into hell every time I write an adventure?
You're a psycho.
I would do that, but only if it was necessary for the adventure, because a lot of my adventures don't feature a lot of faction intermingling.
Got it.
I try to isolate one faction, and maybe I'll think of let's face it, they'll figure out some way to make them have to interact, and then I'll figure it out then. But I'm with you. I mean, in the beginning, I feel like that's what my hardest thing about getting into Shadowrun was I felt like I needed to get it all figured out, because it felt like there's so much information there, and it felt all important. Yeah. If that makes sense. It's a real place. It's Seattle.
It really does. It really does. It feels like it's all important. Recently the party encountered their first ghouls, smart ghouls who could talk and everything else. Mm-hmm. And then they all, everyone, the tribal, the Salish was like, well, how does the tribe do this? I'm like, I don't know. Literally, I went through the book. I don't know. And then everyone well, in my nation, what is there a bounty? And then the party literally sat down at my game table and was like, but are we the dicks? And are we going to, trot on these people because they're different? And I may have thrown a huge party in my own head.
Yeah, we're good for the future. It sounds like that's very good. So I think that's the biggest problem is the real life win there, that your kids our future is safe with good people. But yeah, I'm with you. All the information feels important. I had to talk to a lot of veterans on Reddit before I knew about this Discord. And they had to just tell me dude, just don't worry about it. Just you're gonna screw shit up. It's we all do, even after we played for decades. Just do it. And I was like, okay, that helped me loosen up enough to run my sessions. But before that, it was trying to figure out how it all pieced together, and the lore, all of it, the not just the current day interactions, but the past. How did corporations? What are their histories like?
What is Dunkelzahn doing right now?
Right.
The big D.
Yeah, I usually like what I found when I'm running games is that the players will fixate on one of these factions that are listed here, and they will kind of decide what I'm focusing on. So the players will stumble across a gang in one of the first couple of adventures, and they will decide they hate them, and all of a sudden that's the faction. That's the bad guy now.
My baddies from here on out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I know that feeling.
And then like basically that particular group never makes a run against a corporation because they're too busy getting involved in fights between different gangs in the Metroplex. So they never go and hit Mitsuhama because that's not relevant to what they're doing. So
That's kind of how I did it too. Like I got the mob involved early on, and then it was like I just glanced through the mafia section, and it was talking about how like I think it's the triad, or it might be the Yakuza that are like basically the main
the
adversary.
Yakuza.
The X.
Yeah, the X. And then I was like, okay, that's all I need to know. Like it was like telling me all these names and shit, and I'm like, I don't care. Now I just know like they're kind of in good with the mob. The X might give them issues in the future.
Yeah.
And no matter how bad you feel about any of your adventure design decisions, remember that there is a chapter in an adventure called Yakety Yak.
Oh yeah.
You can never make a worse one than that.
Exactly. So you can roll forward knowing you're doing as well or better than the pros.
That was published. So
Wait, did I write this book? That sounds like something I would write. God damn. That's amazing. Oh man.
So another one I wanted to sort of bounce around also is the lifestyle. Because this is something that, and especially from this time period of the game, like Shadowrun has your character has a lifestyle. They pay rent every month, and it lists specific things they have access to. Like several of the lifestyles give you a car. So you don't even actually have to buy a car. You can actually get a lifestyle and then use your car. My ruling as a game master is that if you're using your lifestyle car, that's traceable back to your whatever is serving as your sin identity. So you don't really want to roll out on a Shadowrun with your license plate out there like that. But it's something you can do. And one of the things that the lifestyle does for Shadowrun, or talking about that sort of lived-in experience of the setting, is the lifestyle sort of implies or forces a calendar onto the game, right? Because if you're a game master and you want to charge your players rent, then it matters what month it is. It matters how many days it has been since the last Shadowrun. You got to start counting time and saying, how many weeks has this been? Because I want to charge you for rent because you've been piling up money. And that sort of, I've never run a role-playing game of the games that I've played. I've not run across a lot of role-playing games where they have such a detailed relationship between what your characters are doing and the calendar. Like your characters are spending 5 days on a run because they did 3 days of legwork and 2 days of actual working on the run, and that's 5 days, and that's a week, and that's 1 week closer to your next rent due. And that's so cool because it makes your characters have a sense of a clock is ticking on them all the time. Yeah.
Right, you just finished your run, and it was a pretty fucking heavy ending there. Like, how long do you want to wait until things cool off? And then 2 weeks.
Right.
Okay, your rent's up. Right.
I have no idea. I have no idea if we cared 30 years ago when I played. But I will say today with Discord, I actually have a channel in our Discord that's literally for the day-to-day tracking. It's called Time and Payments. And I mark every day that occurs. And when somebody says they're going to do an action, I know what day it happens on because I have all this. I didn't have it before. And so much of this chapter I can do outside of our 4 hours of game night now. Does that make any sense? Like before you had to do it when everybody was kind of like coming off their adrenaline and Mountain Dew high and, things were like that. And now I'm like, okay, you finished with the adventure. I know everybody wants to go sleep before midnight. Those of you remote, bye. Those of you in person, I'll see you out. And like, it's great, but I wanted to impose this hard on my players, and so when we started Silver Angel and they had to make it to matchsticks, I was really hard on the two people with a squatter lifestyle. I was like, how are you going to get there in 4 hours?
Yeah.
How?
So
And
that was
then
fun.
one of them said, I'm going to come up out of the gutter. And that's what I'm doing this for. So if I have to, I'll boost a car. But I'm doing this so I don't have to live in the gutter anymore. And I was like, yes.
So
That's amazing.
This sounds
and having
amazing,
things.
but like, how do you go through and like plan all that and make that manageable? Because like, as much as I would like to have like, a little brother who does nothing but crunch math in like the corner of the room to hand me the results, like this takes up like brain processing power as well as like game table time.
Here's what
You'd be surprised. Like, there's always a player at the table that would love to do it. Like, I just asked, like,
Yes.
hey, who wants to do a diary? And the first guy was like, oh yeah, I would love to do that. And my player would literally not only do a diary of the time, and I'd always ask, okay, what day of the week is it? And he would already know. He would always do like last week on Shadowrun and write like a paragraph of what they did the week before, right? He would start us off, like finding volunteers to do stuff is really easy, I find.
If you can leverage players into doing stuff, that's great. But I'm like looking into planning and running things. I'm just trying to figure out a workflow that works so that I can save time both in like session as well as outside of session, because there's just so many things I need to do. Like when running D&D is like, all right, this is fine. Like Shadowrun is like, I need to build a map. I need to like
sprawl sites, baby.
Yeah, I have what I do. What I do is I load up the calendar on the computer. Like whatever computer you're using, Mac, Windows, whatever, Ubuntu, you load up the system calendar and you jump to the year that your characters are acting in. So like I'll load up 2053, right? I'll go to the calendar, I'll say, give me the calendar for 2053, and I will print that out.
That's awesome.
And then I keep that at the table right next to me, and I check off days as the players do stuff. At the at the end of every session, when I'm taking notes, I count the days that happened in that current session, and I mark them off of my little calendar. And at the beginning of every session, I say, so today is Tuesday. You remember what happened on Sunday, this happened, and then we launch into that. So it's really easy by just use that calendar, print yourself off a calendar and check days off. And it also gives the players kind of a sense of how long things have taken them. When you can say, okay, that was 2 weeks ago, guys, look.
Right.
And I should also say that I made the decision to put the time in before the game to make a table of how long it took everyone to get there, because it was the first session and I wanted to impress upon them all what lifestyle really meant. Mm-hmm. And I don't always have the time to do it, but that session was filled with stuff I wanted to punch them with. You know what I mean? Like, I want this to get in your face so you can feel the acid rain that is Shadowrun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And makes them worry about rent, because then they're like, oh, it has been 2 weeks, and I've spent all my money on guns. Shit.
Right.
That is,
and then make the party argue and fight amongst themselves, because that happens. Because like, if Joe wasn't always injured, we could do more runs, but Joe is injured, and then one of the guys paid for his own medical treatment. And then there was a fight at the table, like in character, where they were like, no, we pay for everyone's or we pay for no one's. That's what solidarity means. And I'm just like, evil steepling my fingers going, I didn't expect this, but this is wonderful.
Evil steepling with happy tear.
Yeah.
Anyways, what I'm currently trying to do is like get a corporate compound map and then like buildings in the compound and then like, different floors for targets to the run. But this means that whenever they go to this particular compound, they already have like an idea of the layups and like the layout as well as like what to expect. So if things change, like if they get like new cameras or new like security drones, then it has more of an impact because like they're familiar with the location on top of like different missions throughout the thing. And hopefully it's not the only one, because then like I can rotate out which site they hit. But like, it's a lot of work getting all of that done for a weekly game.
Totally.
Yeah.
On top of like getting everything else put in and figured out.
Yeah.
I mean, I abstract it all, I think, to kind of I mean, I have the benefit of having a podcast. So I can like, what the fuck? What did they do? How long has it been? I'll look back and listen. Oh, it's been 2 weeks. But I also just keep things pretty abstract. Like I'll be like, it's been about 3 weeks, and then I'll be like, okay, so that their rent's up soon, you know, or their lifestyle, not their rent. I got to change how I say that, but their lifestyle's up soon. And then I'll just let them know that I'll take that out of their overall pay or their overall
yeah.
But
like
you also do
an
this
important thing for me is to be consistent, because like if I'm not like working on something on a set schedule, what'll happen is I'll forget to charge rent, like, you know, or forget like this or that, and then like if it's not something you can expect all the time, then it kind of takes away from the experience. But in either case, I have to get going at this point. So like, cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making it, man.
I freely admit that I forget to charge the players who have platelet factories for their anticoagulation meds.
You're gonna, That's so detailed. So detailed. It's true though. You're gonna forget stuff.
I'm way out on the spectrum. All of this somehow matters to me. It's very important.
I love it.
Well, one of the things that you did with Pink Fohawk, Ben, that I've noticed is also you do that little downtime role where you're like, maybe you did a job and you got money out of it. So the fact that you're abstracting even other runs means that I think
that's really fun. Yeah,
makes sense to do it that way. Yeah,
right. That's true. Yeah, I'm breaking.
I thought that was really neat because, like, basically, players have a tendency to bog down the game with minutia, and they don't actually succeed at as many runs as they should because they're just, basically spending a lot of time doing things. So giving them an out and saying you had some downtime, you earned $5,000 on a side run, could actually be a good idea.
Right. To me, it's like we're stringing together the important stories, and even with them, it's sorry.
I just want to say that's amazing because I forget that we're stringing together the important story. Sometimes because my mind is so detail oriented, I think we have to cover everything, including what you had for breakfast. But you're right, we're stringing together the important story.
Well, and I think the reason that's easier for me to remember is that like these two players or the two characters in our game, they're not a team, at least in the beginning. They're sort of just randomly, they have the same fixer and they get the same job. And so it was sort of like the idea was like, they're doing jobs apart from each other too, that we're not hearing about. But the story that we're hearing is when these two get together and go on runs. And so that's where I kind of came up with, that's where I came up with that table. Is like, all right, your character, roll to see what you did. Well, in the meantime, before we, it's been a month and now we're getting you two back together on this gig. Let's roll to see what happened in the meantime. And now they're tight, so that's happening less often of them doing stuff apart. But I still do it just because it's been kind of fun to like have them come up with like complications on their own of what's gone on, or maybe they made money, like a shit ton of money. So then it's just really funny. One of them will roll poorly, one of them will roll really well, and it's just funny when they have to RP this what happened since they've seen each other.
World building.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I think is neat about the lifestyle, I'm looking at my notes that I took while I was reading through here. And the other thing is that you can theoretically, you can abstract lifestyle to be essentially a stand-in for fake ID, right? Like if somebody's paying $10,000 a month twice,
right,
for example, then they can be like, this second $10,000 is essentially under my second identity.
A whole other life.
Right. It's a whole other life, a whole other public record for that character. And so they can actually have their own safe house that is like the low lifestyle apartment they're keeping as like whatever that other name is.
Thank you, kind sir. I'm now putting that directly into our Discord.
It's actually brilliant. I never thought about it, but you're right. It's like
you can have
sure, I'm
just
rich.
Buy three lifestyles, and then one of them is where you go when things get too hot and you don't want to get busted.
That's awesome.
That's really cool, yeah.
Where is it like bolt hole and safe house? Are those rules in this edition or is it somewhere else? Okay.
Yeah, and they tell you how to buy a lifestyle permanently, so you can say, okay, I'm going to pay this much money and I essentially buy a house and have
just 10 times the cost of the lifestyle.
Right.
Yeah. If you buy it for 10 times, then you own it permanently. You don't have to pay rent on it. So
That's
there's a lot of
amazing.
people that use like, low lifestyle. They drop like 50 grand into it and boom, then, that's a permanent low lifestyle that they have as their bolt house, which is a pretty handy mechanic.
It's really handy for if you're playing a rigger and you need a place to store a bunch of cars. You can be like, okay, I'm going to buy I'm going to buy a lifestyle that is like, I've had players where I'm like, okay, so you want a warehouse that's your warehouse for all your vehicles. It's you want to maintain it at a low lifestyle level, but it's a whole warehouse for cars. So let's say that's actually a medium lifestyle because you're running your own electricity, you're buying generators, you're setting the place up, but it's basically in the middle of nowhere with with lots of space for your stuff.
$100,000 facility.
Yeah.
It's
just in the middle of the Redmond Barrens, and you bribe the gang in the neighborhood not to keep people out of your warehouse, but
I had to check one of my players.
Part of the lifestyle cost, right?
Yeah, I had to check one of my players recently. The same thing. She bought a low lifestyle somewhere, but built like a fucking bat cave in it.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that's a higher lifestyle than low. But you're right. It's like it does. You can kind of flavor that and make sure like if there's less break-ins or at least less like people don't assume there's anything really cool in there. So
yeah,
you might get some people that try, but
there aren't a lot of role-playing games that give your characters like a place to live that you don't just sort of like the DM's like, okay, so you live in a village and you have a house because you're in the village.
Right.
Whereas like Shadowrun's like, okay, so where do you want to live? Like what neighborhood? How nice do you want to live? And how much are you willing to pay for it? And that's a really cool thing to be able to just sort of have as a background flavor in the game.
I also realize I've never actually lived anywhere in like D&D. Like I'm always like this fucking vagrant, Yeah. Like I'm always like moving around. Like someone mentioned the home court advantage of being in Seattle. It's like it's so true. You feel like you could even be new to Seattle, but the fact that you have to buy a lifestyle, it does give you some agency in the city. You feel like this is your place.
Yeah.
Whereas like D&D, they could be like, you're in the village of this, and I'm like, I know I'm not gonna be here very long.
Right.
We're gonna
like,
get the fuck out of here. Yeah. Pretty soon the king has been assassinated, and we're gonna travel to that place. We all know we're gonna leave. So that is true. It is different in that. I don't think I've ever seen that really. Does Cyberpunk have that same? Does it have lifestyle? I'm sure it has rent. I know it has rent, but is it something at character creation? I'm sure it is.
It's been a long time since I played 2020. Sorry, and I can't find my book.
It might. I was reading through Red like a year ago or so, and I feel like it was in there. Like the life path had something like that.
And it affects your healing costs, right?
Yeah.
Your rent affects your healing costs and so on.
If you have a low lifestyle, you're not gonna heal from that bullet wound.
Right.
We've got one guy who's got medium. Sorry, two characters who have medium, and it's hilarious because the street sounds are always like, "Hey, 15C, would you mind if I?" He's like, "Yeah, I get it. Come on."
Your couch will keep me from getting infected from all the rats.
Exactly.
The players always wind up couch surfing each other. That's kind of funny, actually.
Totally.
You always get like a couple of ones, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna stay on someone's couch." And
I had a game I was running a few years ago where in the opening session, one of the characters had like a van. And the runner who had street lifestyle decided that he was moving into that van, and there was a fairly entertaining argument almost every session about like, this is my home. I don't know what you're trying to kick me out of here for because I live here.
It is true. They could all at the beginning just be like, the five of us are gonna go in on a high lifestyle together.
Yeah.
We'll do the Friends sitcom.
Well, they do that, right? Especially when they start creating like a club, like, oh, we're going to take over an old fire hall.
Magical order.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our magical order bought a van, I understand.
I also love how like the hospitalized, it just continues to penalize you. Like, you get hurt, you go to the hospital. It's a lifestyle now. It's like that's where
and you
you're
go
living.
broke. And you go broke. And you go to the hospital. What a dystopian future.
Yeah.
Right.
How different from ours it is.
Totally different from ours. I mean, it's hard to make the
Canada,
jump.
so it's free. So
Now who has the imagination? That can't be real.
All right, just to bump us into the next section, I have some karma questions. Which is, first of all, does anybody else fucking hate taking the 10th one off and putting it into karma pool? Because it's so hard to have to monitor all of my players.
We don't ever do that. We skip it.
Because here, I'm gonna show you my spreadsheet because it's
whoa! Are you whipping it out?
I'm gonna screenshot it because it's a Google sheet, so I'm not gonna let you guys into my Google Drive, but
we're already in.
Platinum. I'm having Genmo work on it right now. Just be quiet.
It's actually easier than you think.
You're totally safe and secure.
It's going to take me a minute, so talk amongst yourselves while I find the spreadsheet.
So in addition to the divide by 10, I'm going to actually blow over the whole concept of whether or not you optimize by having low stats at first, because it's easier to raise the stats than anything else, and move right into how many groups use Team Karma? How many groups have players who are chunking into Team Karma?
We have never used Team Karma.
I forget about it all the time.
Thank God. I'm about the same, but
we've had one group, and it's pretty cool actually. And but here's the rule: is you can't contribute to Team Karma until you have a team name.
Oh, I love it.
So that's a screenshot of like my more recent campaign Karma tracker.
Okay, you're my hero because I didn't go this far. And what I did is I used our attendance sheet, and yes, we have one. Don't laugh at me. I used our attendance sheet to determine this, but I like this more.
So basically, there's two columns. There's the karma gain side, and there's the karma loss side. So when you upgrade your character, I put a minus for how much you spent upgrading your character. But at the top, we're tracking total karma, which is the career karma for that character, so we can kind of have a sense of how experienced the character is overall. There's what goes into the karma pool is determined by race. So if you have a not human race where you get more karma pool to start, that's factored in the equations. But yeah, this is how I was able to how I'm even able to keep track of that.
The sound you don't hear is me clapping vigorously.
That's amazing.
Has anyone actually burned karma in order to buy successes?
My players just
where's
did.
where's Ramrod IV? Yes, he has, and he's desperately trying to get infected with human metahuman virus because he wants to be a ghoul, and he's going to burn a karma to only get one success or whatever the perfect ones is. So I just won't let him get exposed now.
I've had it only a couple of times people have burned karma in my game. So
what about a hand of God?
Anybody had that happen?
Yeah.
We had somebody who was about to fall off of a building if they screwed up their roll, and they would have definitely died from the distance that they'd fallen, and they used it to not die from that. That's the only time it's ever happened in my game, though.
The only time I've seen it used is when one player decides to out of the blue just ambush another player, just out of jackassery.
That is jackassery too. To be this will not fail.
This will certainly sit well with the group as players, not just their characters, and it won't create an ill will. Where's my drink again? There we go.
Yeah, no ill will at all.
I am sad that Tom isn't here because I was gonna ask him all about this karma pool thing and where did this idea come from and why didn't you name it something other than karma pool versus good karma? Because players every session, every time somebody's upgrading their character, they're so I have this much karma, how much do I have that I can spend? And I have to have this is why I have the spreadsheet, because I'm
yeah, the karma pool, it is good karma versus karma.
0.1 of it goes into your karma pool, so you should have this much karma pool at this point. But maybe you didn't calculate that correctly because you weren't thinking about that, so whatever.
From now on, go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as an old 5th edition player, I just like to call it Edge, that pool, just because it makes more sense to me, because it's for using it in like situations where you're trying to like save your ass or whatever. So I just call the karma, like that's the stuff that you spend, and the edge is for, burning and whatnot.
And why, like, I'm thinking about this game coming out in like 1989, and lots of games have a concept for, advantage or edge or, push. The abilities that you use, special stats you use to boost your roll when you really want the roll to succeed. But like when Shadowrun came out, like this whole concept of karma pool, it was really hard to wrap my head around as a young player, because I was like, no other game did this thing where you're like, you have extra dice if you really want to do this. And I'm wondering where they got the idea. Like, was it something they brainstormed and they were just like, oh, you know what we should do? We should give them a pool for just anything. Or did they have like another game that they had worked on that had a similar concept? Because Shadowrun's the first place I've ever seen an edge come out as
it may be BattleTech. BattleTech has edge.
James Bond. James Bond was the first Hero Point game, which was like 1983.
Okay.
I think DC Heroes had it too.
Well, and it's also like necessary. And
actually, I think the guy who did DC Heroes did James Bond, so that would make sense.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I know it.
Well, this edition's so fucking deadly too. Like you need. Yeah. These are lifesavers, literally. Like
okay, so we can talk about game lethality now. When you say deadly, do you mean deadly, or take deadly wounds? Because, like in my group, they take a deadly wound twice in adventure. I'm a dick GM, by the way, so don't play my game. But that doesn't mean you're dead. It just means go stabilizing.
No, what I've seen players with like a serious, then take a deadly, and like they're paced.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Like the overkill will do the trick.
Yeah. If you go to 0 to deadly, but if you go from light to deadly, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Or take 2 seriouses, right? Because then you're 2 boxes in overflow already.
Yeah. Because then it's 2 hits. You can't die from 1 hit, but you can die from 2.
Yeah. I haven't quite gotten there yet. None of my characters have taken a deadly yet. They've usually been pretty good at like either getting around it or like taking a slap patch and getting the fuck out of there. So I haven't had to deal with it.
Sandwiches. So they take the deadly in the opening salvo if they're not prepared. But I'm pretty proud of my players because they're willing to pork chop sandwich out.
That's the way you got pork chop sandwich out. That's a deep cut. Yeah, they get the fuck out. That's the way to. That's shadow running. To answer your question though, the way I'm gonna run when you asked about karma, I think I did subtract the 10% off the last time I calculated karma, but from now on, all I'm gonna see it as almost like a tip. Like it's like I'm gonna round off like 10% of it, and just that goes into your karma pool. I'm not subtracting shit. I'm not doing that. I'm not thinking about any of that. This is how many karma you get, and I'm gonna figure out the tip. And you can throw that in your karma pool jar.
Yeah, that's what we do. But you have to top the 0, right? So, at 9, you still have 1 in your karma pool. At 10, you have 2.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. And that's the way that you handle it in the podcast, Ben. The fact that you just give everybody karma at the end of the season, so to speak, actually circumvents this problem, because if you're giving everybody like 4 karma a session, then it creeps on you. But if you're like, okay, I'm giving you 40 karma, 4 of those are karma pool go, that saves all of that headache.
Right.
Super hella smart. Damn.
Well, it's also because my players don't know Shadowrun, so they didn't know they got them. So your players know, they're like, where's my fucking karma, bitch? And
well, the fight we get into every adventure with one of our players is, how come you're not giving individual karma? How come you just give a number for all of us? And like, mother fragger, there's 8 of you, and I'm trying to burn through time here. So no, I'm not wasting to go through. Well, player 5 made a really good joke, and player 6, did this heroic event. I'm like, it's going to average out. We're good.
Yeah.
Right.
I RP'd the shit out of that, and according to this awarding karma section.
Oh God, we have that player. Thank you for the pain and the reminder.
Yeah, well, the argument you have where the player's like, I did this really brave thing, and you're like, that was the stupid thing, not the brave thing. And they're like, no, it was brave. And you have that whole argument is not worth having.
Well, and the other thing is that I'm running mostly pre-made adventures from 89 through 95, and they give out too much fragging karma as it is. I'm serious. Like, I got players who've got 8 karma pool running around now. It's too much. So I'm good with what I've already given you.
That's amazing. I've seen, I think I've got the luxury of like listening to veterans like you guys that have played a lot, and like the stories of like power creep if you award too much karma or if you give too little money, like all these different things I've been able to kind of circumvent just by reading forums and stuff and being like, yeah, I should probably charge more. I should probably give them more money and less karma. That to me gives them toys to play with, but they still have to be smart, and they can't just buy their way out with karma pool.
Wait, they have to be smart? No. Nobody told me.
Well, if they want to pass their perception checks,
I
a little smart.
I don't ever penalize people for bad rolls, but I penalize people for being stupid.
Yeah.
Like, and that's, like that might be one of the humor things, but yeah, you know what? If you're stupid, then you get penalized. That's natural selection at work.
I totally agree. Our big dumb troll who buys everything on sale, whether or not he needs it, Discount Daryl, had to save the whole party because they were going to attack a mob boss who was being very polite. And he totally silent bombed them and said, if he's not afraid of us and he's been around and seen people like us, maybe we should think twice about whether or not we want to attack him. And I was like, damn it, when the troll has the wisdom.
Right.
You guys ever bail out a character?
It's more indicative of perception and understand, like how fast you learn something. It has nothing to do with wisdom. Wisdom is built.
True. What were you saying, Eddie?
I was going to say, sometimes I like to meta for my characters. Like if they have like a high intellect or something and they're about to do something really dumb or forget something that they should kind of know, I'll be like, give me this roll. And I'll be like, you just remembered this, because it feels unfair to let the player's lack of intelligence dig in a bit on their character.
Well, I also penalize them for the arrogance of their characters. I'm just going to be clear. Like, if they keep talking like you can do everything and they're mean to everyone around them, I let them dig that grave. Like that. Go for the 2 meters, buddy. Keep digging that 2 meter grave, because I will. We have a ceremony here where I'm old. So if you know the theme song to Bonanza, we take your character sheet out when you lose one, and we light a match under it, and it burns from the center out when we do the theme song. I'm happy to Bonanza all your characters if you're arrogant.
So, can we unpack that player not intelligent thing? Because I don't know. I don't suffer fools, and I don't collect them. My father-in-law couldn't suffer fools, but he had a very large collection of them around him. Hopefully not a lot of GMs do that. But you know what? If you don't get it, maybe this isn't the game for you.
I believe
I hear what you're saying, but I would give you an example. For example, like say you want to play a face, but you're not really good at RP. Like, do you really want to be like, well, since you're not able to come up with a convincing, on the fly lie, well, I'm going to penalize that for you. You kind of have to, your characters are not all at the same level of intelligence and RP. You know what I mean? Like that street savvy of being able to just think of things on the fly. And if you're going to penalize them and treat them as fools in quotes there, they're just going to be kind of like, maybe not apt to evolve as a role player, so you kind of, I tend to have players that have never role played at all. So I kind of like want to coax them into becoming good role players. And if I'm a bit cruel, then I don't think I'm going to get there.
So they're inexperienced, but they're not stupid, right? Like, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, okay. Obviously I don't tend to hang out with actual stupid people, but what I'm saying, it can equate to being stupid in the game if you don't really understand how role-playing games work. And you didn't take cover and you walked around a corner and got shot in the face with with a shotgun. But I mean, if your character has stats and stealth and has like knowledge skills and like military combat and this and that, well, I might be like, a little bit more forgiving in that they forgot or didn't play it just right. Like there's a little bit of leeway there.
I think Eddie's talking about a layer of abstraction to make it the reality fit. And then what happens to me, though, is the players are like, we killed a fucking dragon. How tough can a mob boss be? And before I have to say anything, Discount Daryl's like, just shut up.
Discount Daryl for the win.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, that's also what the dice are for. It's like, I want to convince this person to do this thing. Okay, roll your etiquette. And then if they roll really high and they don't know how to like pull off the RP aspect of it, I can kind of be like, I don't know what it is. There's something about you, the way you're moving, the way you're acting. They feel you get what's going on here. You're throwing off corporate lingo. They feel comfortable around you. So now they agree to this. Like the RP doesn't have to sell it always if the dice roll does.
Right. So question about that. Does that mean then that a player's RP can now replace skills?
No. If a skill, at least in my game.
I was going to say, like, how I tend to do that, to answer both of those questions in a way, is that when a face, for example, is about to try to convince a mob boss to give them a deal, I'll be like, well, what angle are you doing this on? Are you trying to, like, if they're not good at RP, I'll at least make them give me an angle. I'll be like, well, okay, so how are you doing this? Are you going to kind of, like, intimidate him? Are you going to kind of butter him up? Or are you going to try to, like... play it off as if you're really good at this, whatever. So once they give me an angle, then I decide the difficulty of that roll, and then we let the dice decide. But it gives them at least a little bit of like RP to abstract if they're not actually good at the actual RP,
Yeah, I do that too.
And I feel like with role-playing games, right? Like most people who play a street samurai who's very strong are not themselves very strong. And they don't get advantages for if your player is a weightlifter, they don't get advantages to play a character, who has a strength too, but because they're physically strong, they can do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do in game. So I think like that same thing translates. Like if someone's playing a character who's quite frankly smarter than them, because that happens, the rolling the dice should allow them to say, you know what, I may not be as smart as this guy that I'm playing, but this guy I'm playing should be able to figure this out. They shouldn't be limited by what they can figure out when they're playing a genius character, and they're in real life maybe a 3 or 4 intelligence. Their character should be able to think their way out of something that the player might not be able to. And so those sorts of abstractions are part of the role-playing game. If you have a character if you have a player who's awkward, but they're playing a character that's not, and they have a really high etiquette skill, they can bungle their way through the dialogue as awkward as they want to. If they make the roll, their character pulled it off.
Right.
I am in this podcast, I align with that. And I do not like being tagged.
What?
I'm awkward, and so I get exactly where he's going because I'm awkward, as you can't tell by the way I delivered the joke. So I get it. Like there has to be some layer of abstraction.
And that's where
a good GM comes in, right? Like they're able to take your cues and make the story cool with what you say, right?
I agree, and but let's face it, someone that is suave or good with words is going to probably think of better solutions to things.
Or at least the way they present them, we'll think of them as better solutions. That's called an unconscious bias. So I've developed an unconscious bias against suave people. So I penalize them for being suave. Aha!
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like there's instances where like none of my characters are faces. they just bungle their way through things. But sometimes they'll do something that surprises me. Like they'll try to hit on somebody and then they'll roll and they'll succeed. And so now that person, looking at the social skills table, that person is not, that person is in favor of agreeing with what they're trying to do later on. And I feel like, just the fact that they're able to think of that gave them that advantage. That wasn't necessarily the dice still decided whether or not that advantage happened, but it took their idea to stack that in their favor. You know what I mean? Whereas otherwise, I feel like if I was just playing the game, with people that didn't think that way. We would just go straight to the person we're supposed to talk to and roll an etiquette, if that makes sense. And again, like you said, we'd still be able to abstract it away to help this person who's not really good at speaking, if their character's supposed to be. That wouldn't impact how they roll. But someone who knows how to like play the game a little better is gonna, I do think that happens, just naturally is gonna happen. Someone that knows how to play the game better is gonna stack things in their favor better than someone who doesn't. So, but I won't penalize someone who doesn't know how to play, if that makes sense.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
But I will penalize somebody that constantly makes really bad decisions, like pulling out guns in wrong places or trying to think that they're better than they are.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, we had that recently, so I understand.
That's when I turn the player and give them make them do an intelligence check. And are you sure about that?
Right.
Yeah, we were running hate, and they wanted to go in. They put on all the makeup to be fake elves. They wanted to go in and see what this organization was about. I believe Association Paranobilis, but my memory is not what it used to be. And they're in there, and after I did a stand-up speech on the fly about, the nature of elves and how they had to be in the wilderness and everything else, one of the players says, I just quick draw. And I'm like, excuse me? They're all in the room with you. He's like, they need to die. This is so wrong. I quick draw. I'm like, okay, I give him a chance. And of course, he was the one who got a deadly wound because some of them were wired, right? So he thought, I've always been the fastest. This will be no problem. And he goes to quick draw, and he's the first one shot down.
It turns out the hippies were wired.
Yeah, the fake hippies. Let's all remember that. The fake
the
hippies.
hippie posers.
Hippies were fake.
The poser elf poser hippies.
The hippie posers will not suffer fools. Exactly. Exactly. I feel like Don't Suffer Fools needs to be in this section at the end. Be be fair. Do not suffer fools.
When we get that crowdfunding thing for Tom to rewrite, we have to remember.
I did like that turn of phrase. I don't suffer fools and I don't collect them. But I know people who don't suffer fools but do collect them.
And then you got to add a third part at the end, and I will bonanza your character sheet, right?
Yeah. I am going to use that. So do you actually light it on fire? Because that would be epic.
I do.
That's awesome. Question about so I've GMing for so long. There are often times that I miss something, but when someone literally does something that's just so laugh out loud funny, right? Like in character, it's appropriate, and it's like I have no problem going, boom. That's like a karma point right there, so I don't have to worry about it later. And there's times where sometimes I've awarded more than one to the same player. Does anybody else do that as well when they're
totally?
When I have 6 or less in the game, sure. But since my current game has 10 characters and 8 show up at a time, I just ain't got the bandwidth.
That's insane. I don't know how you do that, man. 8 characters. My mind would be blown in a bad way.
Yeah, sometimes I make bad decisions.
It's a lot. That's a lot to keep track of, man.
If 8 people showed up at my house to play Shadowrun, we would be playing One Night Werewolf. That's what would happen.
I tell you that
I don't even have a lot of board games that would support 8 people.
What's the honey bear? What's the fucking honey bear game?
I'll tell you what makes it work for us is many of us, not all of us, some of us are under 30, but many of us played really, really old school D&D. And so one of the things that was beat into us was you roll initiative, you write down your declared action, and you go forward. And I don't know, it's weird because modern games is kind of like this whole meta talk about, interrupt the turn and all this stuff happens. And when we have 8, I just have to say, you got to decide before we get into that what you're going to do. And the players have really got on. And yes, it may hurt them because they haven't been able to stack 9 metas into some mega action, but it does kind of keep the game moving forward. And we specifically have a bitch session beforehand and a wine session after. And we try to say, hey, talk about work and stuff beforehand and after. And I don't know, it just works for us. It's been
there's something
20 years.
There's something cool about that idea. There's something cool about that idea where, the game is very turn-based, right? So it's like, okay, you do your thing, and then you wait for that person to do that thing. And it's like, well, since they did that, I will do this. But in real life, everybody would be deciding and kind of doing things at the same time. I kind of like what you're going with that. I remember that that one fight against the ghouls in Pink Fohawk, where John was like, well, who's next on the initiative track? I'm going to attack them. But in real life, you couldn't really do that, right? You don't really know where that ghoul is really doing and what he's going to do. And that level of meta kind of becomes more of a video game than it does a role-playing session, I find.
Yeah, especially like I was thinking about like modern games and juggling that many players, and like Blades in the Dark, like the initiative is everybody decides what order they do things in. And I was like, I just 8 people arguing over, no, I want to hit them first. Is that my brain would melt trying to get through a round of combat with that.
Yeah, and also just the way that like how many times, I mean, legwork works this way too in Shadowrun, unfortunately, but with more people it's even worse. But like where the plan keeps changing or going back to square one after they've gotten to a certain point. So, okay, wait, you're gonna do that? Okay, let's back all the way up. And you can't nail down exactly what they're doing. You could sit there forever theoretically. So what you're doing, Ramrod, is like it's a smart way of like with 8 players. It's the only way you could get through a fucking session in a night. Yeah, is to be like, what are you doing before you walk in this room? You got to tell me right now.
Yeah, when I'm angry, I say you got to tell me right now. But we've got a culture right amongst our group, and it's nice. It's really nice how everyone's adapted to it and they've thought it. But it just reminded me of the other thing I do, and this is going to sound crazy, but I'm going to recommend everybody do it at the end of each adventure. Because if you haven't figured it out, I'm hyperactive. And I'm riding this massive adrenaline high, especially if it went well. I write down what everyone did that was clutch. And I have to make sure that everybody had something they did that was clutch. And this is harder with 8, but it's really amazing how this group does a good job of organizing it so that, somebody had somebody they did that was clutch. And of course, we have a buff mage who I, as the GM, know what they did with clutch. But it's hard, to for other people to see it because, right? It just he just added 3 willpower to 3 characters. Think about that, guys. Think about what they did.
Right.
So I recommend it. Keep a list of what everyone did that was clutch, and you'll see if maybe you're subconsciously limiting a character or a player.
That's super cool. Can I ask a question about people that don't run fixed adventures? Like I improv literally everything. I don't know, my brain just works better that way. And one of the things I try and find to balance is, because threat rating, the karma that you award depends on the threat rating, and it also depends on the number of goals that have been achieved, right? So does anybody kind of set those up as well when you're like, how do you do those in your improv game as well? Like, so do you write them all? Go ahead.
Yeah, my mechanism is like everybody gets a karma for showing up per session. And then I have a idea in mind about like how hard the adventure was and how much karma that gets. So like there isn't really, I have essentially the karma I award is pretty static. In that you can, unless somebody does something absolutely bonkers, the karma you're going to get is the karma you're going to get.
Right.
I do the same. I was just wondering if anyone does anything kind of different. Does anyone do anything kind of different?
The only thing I do different is like Noish said, I do sort of like I do it by season. So I'll do like 3 runs and then I'll calculate the karma at the end of that and like let them and give it to them as like a pool afterwards. And they can vary. I do the same thing. It's like 1 karma just for being there. But then it's like if there's one where they had a lot of combat and could have died, you'll get upwards of 8 to 10.
Yeah.
And if it's just like you got through a thing and talked your way through it, you still get karma, but it's probably like 4 or 5 or 6, and then they just get this pool and they can like level up their stats with.
I usually award more karma if they don't get into combat. Like I know combat's like its own reward kind of deal, but I generally give them like, hey, that was really intelligent and you got the same difficulty rating, but you didn't have to, put your character into death's grasp.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Getting around combat too, I would also. Yeah, I'm with you.
I think of it in terms of challenges, right? Like basically like,
yeah,
whether they solve the challenge with combat or they solve the challenge with a clever argument, the challenge is worth and this comes from like just this is agile programming methodology getting into a little bit like the points are the points.
For this sprint, or is it? I'm sorry, the sprint or the story? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I got lost.
Right, like,
let me look at my dashboard.
The points are the points. The challenge is 3 points of karma, right? And whether they shoot their way through those 3 points or they, sneak their way or basically argue their way through those 3 points, that's their 3 points. And so like there's no advantage to, there's the disadvantage of combat is that they then have to heal afterwards. Right. And so combat ends up being a bigger pain in the butt if they can use one of the other routes. And I was gonna say also, I run a mix of like made up adventures and published adventures, just flipping between them. And I never look at, or like I very rarely look at the published adventures like recommendation for karma and payout, because I have my own formula. And so like I'll use the adventure for the story, but when it comes to like how much the employer is paying, I have an idea of what the power level is for this.
It would throw your scale off.
Right. Nice. And so I don't give them, if the adventure says this is a 15 karma adventure and I'm like, there's no way I'm giving them 15 karma for this. That's right. That's the number of the amount of karma that comes out of it. It stays consistent based on how I run the game and how what the players are expecting out of it.
What you just described is a way better idea, a way better definition of how I do it. I said it wrong. It's not based on combat so much as like in terms of they have to fight, but the challenge, like getting around combat or whatever, they would still get that same.
I think in the game, by the way, it's called success on page 1, whether or not they admit the objective. It doesn't actually reward combat; it rewards meeting the objective.
Right. There's something around there about the challenge of the
threat level. There's a threat like how dangerous it was. Just one for playing through. That's the survival.
Right.
But I think Platinum said something that triggered some emotions. So in addition to adventures I write that are adventures and adventures that are published, I also have sandbox events where the players are supposed to like meet their own goals. And I'll tell you, my last one, I give no karma, 0, because they stalled. They talked to a whole bunch of people, but they did not achieve anything. Yeah, there was no losses. You know what I mean? They didn't cause, but that's a harder one for me because we did a whole session and a whole bunch of people were talked to, but no one pushed to achieve a goal. Does that make any sense? So the next one will be on, a decision tree because I won't do that again for a while. I've learned.
I actually awarded karma once for not taking the adventure, like extra karma for not taking the run. It was a human trafficking thing, and they figured it out early, and they're like, nope. Yeah, they're like, something smells wrong, and they're like, nope. And I'm like, boom, like extra karma. And then we ran another adventure after, but I was like totally impressed that they figured it out so quickly.
Yeah. It's awesome.
That's very cool.
Yeah, but they didn't take down the human trafficking ring or anything, so
The karma could have been so much more. They still got some karma though.
I wish my characters would when they realized, like, whatever their line is. I'm going to make that clear. I don't enforce a line on any character, but if they particularly saw a line they didn't want crossed, if they stood up for it. But when we were talking about 8 characters before, someone said something in chat recently that I loved. It was about the all hacker game idea, and it was Nasrudith, and it was like the economy of actions. And I wanted to say, when it comes to legwork, when I have 8 characters, they always find what they need.
Yeah.
Because there's 8 people with contacts who get a chance to roll. The economy of actions wins.
Right.
What's interesting is that like those early modules, like not to get into spoilers, but they kind of assume that the players are on the side of the like good guys, right? Like,
yes, most certainly.
Yeah, like Mercurial, like if you're really, if you're at all calculating the payout for, you should like midway through, when you start figuring out what's going on, you should be like selling out Mercurial to the highest bidder, like as soon as that starts, right? And they never even really consider that when they wrote the module. Like similarly, Ivy and Chrome, like, it's kind of like a college. It's almost like a college. You're looking for college students, like you're trying to help a college student and their mother. And like, as technology, like the Black Ops division is pursuing this person. So like, like if you have some like rando you met on the virtual web who gave you this job, or you could just turn over their kids to as technology and collect the payout, right? Like, I mean,
it's the college student's aunt even, and there's like no way this woman has enough money to compete with as technology. There's no way.
I am proud that my table is full of heroes.
But think of that sweet karma dump afterwards.
So Ramrod IV is now pointing out, and he's blaming me that they've managed to kidnap 3 women. Let me make it clear. In Mercurial, what do? You kidnap Mercurial. In Queen Euphoria, what do? You kidnap Euphoria. So my players, being very well with the bad optics, have complained that they are known on the street for kidnapping white women. It's pretty bad.
I don't think you're protecting Mercurial.
Yeah, but
Mercurial is Latina though. She's not white, right?
Well, okay, but
She could be white.
What do we call this?
She's white presenting on the cover.
White presenting, thank you. She is white presenting in all of the art. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. God damn it! Did I just think Mr.
Was Jesus white then? By that,
well, but he wasn't white presenting. But anyways, but they I can't remember the third. It's a published adventure too. But there's a point where it seems like you've kidnapped. Right, the world is told you've kidnapped Mercurial. It doesn't matter whether or not you did it, Eddie. Right, remember that the whole world, including your buddies, turns on you in Mercurial. Right, which also upset me because I think the same thing happens in Queen Euphoria. And the players are like, "Really, you're going to fucking play that card again, Ramrod?" And I'm like, "Leave me alone, dude." That's what the adventure says. But yes, they are.
Well, they actually do it. They actually do it in Euphoria. In Euphoria, you definitely. You're definitely supposed to distract her for 3 days or whatever. Yeah,
you're supposed to keep her away from an event, essentially.
Yes, from the Bako Soy versus Ambergel war in the Stuffer Shacks. God damn it, brain, stop. But
well, so it's funny. I in my game I made my own sort of Mercurial mission, my own pop star, and like a hit on it and whatever. And
Jessica.
Yeah, Jessica. And I was just like, this will be fun. Okay, so I'll come up with like, they'll be going to this concert and they figure out that this hit's going to happen. They'll thwart the hit, right? And then it was like, no, you have the opposite. At least your players aren't like mine. They're like, how do we get on the hit?
And they
they got in on it. Like they fucking got in on killing this superstar.
The greatest thing that can happen in Mercurial, I found accidentally, because my players were very suspicious of Max from the beginning. So they kicked him out of the dressing room and wanted to talk to Mercurial one-on-one. And like, that's exactly when the attack happened. So they threw Max out of the dressing room as like the hit squad from the double cross comes in, and they injured but did not kill Max, right? So like the misdirection that causes is just like amazing, because all of a sudden the Johnson that they thought was like setting this up is now like, oh my God, he would never like get killed, right? Like he almost got killed, man. So like there's no way that this is not a legitimate job. I highly recommend having like the double cross actually almost take out Foley.
I think he got injured in mine, but the part that blew away my characters was when she shot one of the intruders and was faster than the mages.
Oh yeah.
And then you could just see this like, what? And all the jaws dropping. They're like, but she's a pop star.
Does anyone have a really good way to use double crosses? Like, It just seems so cliche and kind of like.
No, the players hate them.
Yeah, it's not.
Well,
I don't do them.
I'm okay with them hating it as long as it's good, right? Like you want to keep them thinking.
It wouldn't be like well, first of all, the whole setup is a little weird in Shadowrun if you actually think about it, right? Like if you really have a fixer who's setting up a team every time, like you probably wouldn't work with the same people unless you were doing the same kind of job every time. So like you wouldn't actually be a team, but like the fact that you are a team and like you're dealing with the same people giving you jobs a lot, like you really shouldn't, unless, the life of a Shadowrunner is like 2 months and they get like rubbed out and they're totally disposable. Like if this is a continuing business, then like the Johnson betraying everyone just doesn't really work.
Yeah.
I've never needed to have Mr. Johnson betray anyone. Like I've used it maybe a couple of times, but literally every Shadowrun, the players are like, "Oh my God, this is the one who's going to betray us." So you get all this extra mileage out of the player paranoia without ever having to build in betrayals into your adventure.
I actually think Mercurial is really well done because like he's a patsy, not like
Yes.
He didn't actually. He's not trying to screw you necessarily. He's just like been set up himself.
I had to make my players were brand new to Shadowrun when we started, and so that was I made that effort to be like, I'm not even giving any hints that there's going to be a double cross ever, because I need them to trust the system. Like, we need to move on. They need to take this job, trust that this person's giving them a legit job. They're not going to get fucked. They're going to get paid in the end. I was like, I need to like build that trust, because like I feel like I'm with you, Noish. Like I feel like there's enough mystery in this game. What you're doing is illegal, and you're usually doing something fucking crazy, like killing someone or stealing some huge expensive thing from somebody that really would kill for it. So it's like when you get to like, and things are so shady when you get to the meat afterwards to get their pay or whatever, they're all expected to be double crossed anyway. So it was like, I was like trying to make an effort to not ruin that suspense, like keep them feeling that way. But like, no matter how much I feel like it would be fun to double cross them at any point, don't do it. Like keep them, build that experience that like they've done a handful of runs and pulled them off,
Or do it once. They'll never forget that one double cross, and all the rest of them they'll be worried about it. So
right. But then they'll never, if you did that for like, I just feel like a lot of new players they'll play like Shadowrun Returns, or something. And then they'll like play Shadowrun, and the first fucking run, they'll pull a double cross.
Yeah.
And it's like from then on, your players don't trust anybody in that world.
Yeah.
Like they're like, I don't take that job. Let's do, 2 sessions of legwork on this Johnson. And it's like, oh my God, it's fine. This one won't be a double cross, I promise.
So the one thing that we had happen recently that I loved the effect of, even if a player was emotionally upset about it, was we finished Eye of the Eagle, and without too many spoilers, they destroyed the weapon at the end, but not safely, right? So it still poisoned all the water in the bay. And the players wanted their full 10 times the initial down payment from Farseer. That was the name of the Johnson. And like there was this huge, we're going to burn all of her land. They were one of the players was so pissed. He's like, we went through all that trouble. 2 of us are still in the hospital, and you're telling me just because we didn't totally cleanly dispose of the weapon, we're not. And he was enraged. Thankfully, one of the other player characters is a Sleesh, and he's like, you're not going after her. My tribe hooked us up. You're not doing this. But it was like that contention worked out way better than a double cross. Like a double cross is cliche, right? But this contention over whether or not you did it exactly the way that Johnson wanted and how you define that in the future, which jobs you take, that was awesome. Now they're like, let's be careful about what we think we're taking.
Totally. Yeah, my players learned that lesson. they double cross each other at some point. It's a pretty good it's a setting ripe with that shit. So I feel like you don't have to do it, but I mean, obviously you can pull it off. There's ways to pull it off well.
I really try and head that off at the beginning, like in session 0 when we talk about table culture. It's like, you know what? Like bad blood between and PCs becomes bad blood between players. So I really try and make sure that the players don't, burn each other, because it just puts a bad taste in your mouth, and if it puts the bad taste in someone's mouth, it's going to spoil it for everyone.
I agree. Yeah, ours. I won't go into it, but it was pretty harmless. It was almost like just halfway through a run, one of them was like, "I'm not going through with this anymore. Like, I don't want to do this anymore."
Oh, that's fair. Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily a double cross so much but the character was definitely felt betrayed, but the player character was totally cool. But I'm with you. Like, PvPing and doing shit like that can get really nasty, for sure.
Somebody give Doc Tom karma, because he's supposed to be here. We need these questions answered.
Yes, exactly. How are we supposed to play this game, Tom, without you here to tell us?
You're supposed to explain why we do this so that we know why.
Right. Tell me where you were when you wrote it.
To be honest, the fact that he showed up as many times as he has, I'm like, oh my God.
Oh,
like,
totally.
So cool.
Yeah. I didn't hear from him this time, and I figured he was saying last time that he got his promotion, and it's going to be a lot more
so he's
work.
probably busy.
He's probably busy.
Yeah.
Next section, of course, is the quick matrix systems. I'm sure you've all put to use and used in your games. As we covered before.
I'm sad I missed the Matrix meetup.
It was a good time.
Well,
I'm sad I missed the gear.
We haven't done the gear yet.
I thought gear was before. I thought gear was last week or last time.
Nope.
Matrix was last
time was Matrix. And then we're doing behind the scenes.
Out. So you haven't missed it yet.
You have not missed it.
Well, because one of the things I was saying, or what in the Matrix one, was like my question kind of about whether the Matrix was for casual users or not, was kind of like the point that I was kind of going towards there is that like there aren't an explanation of how the casual user is supposed to use the Matrix.
Right.
All we get is like, here's what deckers do. And we don't have an example. We have in Magic places, or in for example, I'm like, if I'm a mage, I know what's in astral space. I know where the mage hangouts are. I know how to find a talismonger. I know what's going on. I know about those concepts. If I'm a ganger, I know where gangs are. I know how the gangs work. But if you're a decker,
yeah, you're in or you're out, right? In those systems.
And if you're a decker,
everyone's in the Matrix.
What's in the Matrix? Like, is there a World of Warcraft? How many different types of World of Warcraft are the casual users like logging on to play?
Right.
What's a chat room look like? Like, what does a chat room in the Matrix look like? What's Discord in the Matrix look like? These are things that aren't rules, but would really go a great distance towards making the rules less scary.
I thought so much of that was ironed out, when they talked, like, because we had bulletin boards back then, and really Discord isn't much different than a bulletin board, but we just, instead of a bulletin board, like, people can hang out virtually.
Right.
And it's essentially the same thing. Right.
And but the thing is, like there's a Seattle source book, for example. And if I want to be like, okay, I have an adventure to run tonight. I need a club for the runners to meet at. There's dozens of examples just in the Seattle source book, and if you want to go through other source books, there's even more. But if I was to say, I'm running this adventure in the Matrix because I have only deckers, the deckers have to meet somewhere. I got to start from zero. I got to be like, okay, what's a chat room look like? What are the chat rooms named? What's the theme of the chat room? You don't have anything to build off of. And so
I thought some of that was covered in virtual realities too.
Not a lot of statistical stuff is, but there aren't really any places.
Right. And I think like Seattle Sourcebook had Matrix address locations, I think, on like the ads, the company ads.
Yeah.
Yes, they're all dungeons. I get what you mean, Noise. And when I asked Tom that, I don't know if you got a chance to watch it, but
I did.
Tom,
I listened to it a couple days ago. So
yeah, Tom, we asked your questions and Tom was answering it. And I realized where you're going with that too. And I realized that's also something that tripped me up. Not necessarily like, what does the mundane person do in mundane, for lack of a better word, the casual user in the Matrix do, but kind of what I realized what tripped me up in that section was there's all this flavor in the very beginning of like how everyone uses the Matrix. And then it's like, then it goes into regional codes. And then it goes into like what deckers do.
Yeah.
And for me, it was kind of like, it felt like this is what everyone does almost. Yeah. There was no like line break there. Like, okay, but you're the fucking decker. You're behind all this shit. You're doing these crazy things that get around what normal people do. It just kind of all felt together.
Yeah.
And then what I think the problem that instilled in my mind was then like, it made me feel like I needed to do all these rules for the Matrix for every single test with the Matrix.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like it could have been written a little differently to make you realize like, these rules are for when the shit is hitting the fan. Like when you're doing something that's good, that's really challenging beyond your, normal hacking.
You're breaking things essentially.
Right. Otherwise, resolve things in fewer roles.
Because I imagine a Matrix where like basically the landscaper guy gets off of work at 5, he goes home, he plugs in, and he plays World of Warcraft until he goes to bed. And that's a Matrix user. And those are probably most of the Matrix users. So then if you're a decker, you're like, okay, so actually when I meet with this guy, I'm gonna meet in like in the shadowy veil in World of Warcraft, and we're gonna hash out what we're gonna do because that's a nice place to go where no one's gonna really notice us, and hash out our plan. That kind of flavor, you gotta build from scratch if you're a game master. There's no like, here are the 5 most popular games. Here's what a chat room looks like. Here's a chat room where people who like to talk about magic hang out at. And I would have liked more of that kind of material to sort of, just as a game master, not have to sort of build it from scratch.
Right.
We should just be... So I started doing like... trying to do random contacts and stuff and throw them into like random NPCs and throw them into like a source book kind of, or into our general GM tips and stuff. We should basically do the same thing for like locations. Just crowdsource.
Good idea. Just come up with crazy ideas. Throw them all in. That's great. But Critical Fault says Target Matrix has all that stuff.
It has some of that stuff.
I had a small anecdote a little bit based on like this whole Matrix thing. Like the first thing that got me into Shadowrun back when I was like 14 years old is I picked up a Shadowrun novel. And the one that I ended up picking was called Lone Wolf. And it's basically, spoilers, a really old story, but basically it's an undercover cop in a gang. So the whole story, and this is written by Nigel Findlay, which is like a guy that did a lot of work for Shadowrun. It just goes to show you how they didn't really think of the Matrix very much. Basically, at the, I guess near the end of the book, this guy assembles basically a Shadowrun team to do a mission, and they need to get some information, and they literally call a decker on the phone and like, yeah, we need this information, and the decker comes back to them in a couple days and gives them all the information, and that was it. They don't describe like what the decker did or anything like that.
They made him an NPC.
Yeah, like, and it was just like,
I read that
book. And it just made me laugh because I was just like looking at the lens. I've read it again recently, and I was just like, yeah, that's pretty much how I GM now because I'm so intimidated by the Matrix. I'm just like, that's pretty much it, just like Nigel Findlay did it.
Well, that also brings up a good point too. Like I realized just in this session, actually, like to us talking right now, I realized casual users in my game, in my mind, don't play World of Warcraft in like 3D virtual reality in my mind canon. Like they use cyber terminals and like virtual reality is just for the hackers who have like the rigs, the decks that are powerful enough to handle that kind of power.
Yeah. In my head canon, it's tiered, right? There are casual users who like use VR rigs and like haptic gloves like Johnny Mnemonic, and they go in and they do whatever matrixing stuff, and they're slow because they're limited by the UI, essentially. They can't move as fast as a thought. They have to move with their hands, and they have to speak with their mouths. They can't just do things quickly. Then there's the electrode users, right? The people who use a half DNI, a direct neural interface. And they're faster, but they're still, from a Decker perspective, like noobs. And then there's the Decker, and the people who are the people with the data jacks, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so
But the thing with the data jacks, right, is the data jacks will read your mental commands and so on. Right. But you need to go full VR in order to get that extra die, right? Because there's actually an extra die that's available, but you need to be in full like UV VR mode.
Right. Right. But you can think commands if you're jacked in. You think commands and they happen. If you're doing it through like goggles and gloves, you're like actually going through the menus and clicking on the item that needs to, you're like, I'm going to shoot that guy, so I'm going to pull the shoot trigger. And the Decker who's jacked in just shoots like they're standing in the room with them. And that makes them way faster and way more effective.
I see what you mean.
That's how it works in my head, at least.
the TrodeNet folks have to like actually physically, they're hindered by their own physical bodies a little bit and how fast they move.
They're limited by how fast they can move, essentially.
Right.
But
I hear you.
Sorry to drag this off topic like that, but I was trying
off topic. We're in the quick matrix systems.
My matrix reading group into the following one.
No, I'm loving it. I do love the quick matrix system section. I am less daunted by it now. I think I'm going to use core matrix in my game coming up. I'm just going to get rid of the dungeon crawl, basically. I'm basically going to make it like VR 2.0 in a way.
I love it. Basically, what I do is I have them go into like this virtual reality host. It's usually like a pagoda or a temple or something. And they walk up to this big diocese or a tablet or whatever, or obelisk, and then they send their queries into the obelisk. I have them pull out their utilities. So, like a scan might be a pair of sunglasses or something. And then they'll like tilt their sunglasses down and at the obelisk or whatever, and that's basically running their search and so on. And it adds cinematography and keeps it very, very fast. So it's basically, boom, you run this utility, run. Okay, you find it. Here's how long it takes to download it, or are you going to try and execute it or delete it or what? It runs very quick.
Do you go through all the nodes?
I don't do the. I don't make it more than like 3 or 4 nodes.
Okay.
Right. So I'll basically have like a main system, subsystem, and a storage system or something.
And is that for like a whole facility? Like, let's say you walk into like some place, would the 4 nodes be sort of like that storage? That data bank, or data store is for like the entire facility, or are you having like separate computer systems within the facility?
No, I'll do it for like the whole facility, and that's
smart.
Yeah. So then there's like a whole bunch, like there'll be all the cameras and whatever, but all the cameras go back to a central server. You know what I mean? Like so those are just slaves, basically. So there's a whole bunch of slaves, but the slaves don't actually have anything of importance. So if you want to shut down a slave, you use the main system and shut down the slave.
Right.
The challenge
you got to get to the CPU or something.
That's very smart, because the challenge with rules as written with the dungeon crawl is that you can't get anywhere from anywhere, right? So like if the node that controls the cameras is 7 locations away from where your data store is that you're downloading, and the meat body team shows up at the facility and they're like, turn off the cameras, you have to go node, and each one of those you're potentially triggering ice and starting a battle. And so you're jumping from node to node to node just to shut off the cameras, and then you have to walk all the way back across to continue your download. And that's not something that's that's not something that really works so great with, combat time and trading actions between the meat world and the virtual world.
Do you still play
hybrid?
What you describe actually works really well in my mind. So,
do you still play it like a tree platinum, where it's like you still have to go through a node to get to another node, or is it they're all sort of accessible to you? It's just the target number you have to beat.
So what I will do is basically at the beginning, I will have the decker create a bot, or spin up, use their hacking pool to spin up a bot, or like a daemon kind of deal. And the number of success, so I'll have, in order to find the operation, it'll take 4 turns divided by the number of successes. And then they'll be able to find it anywhere on the network, right? So it'll be in a sub node, and they'll be able to locate it and go to that sub node basically instantly. But it'll take that daemon for either 4 turns, 2 turns, or 1 turn to find it.
I see. And once it's found it, then they roll to get it.
Yeah, they roll to get it, and down, or and then it might be, so it'll be wrapped in ice, right? And they have to decrypt it or defeat the ice or whatever. And then it'll take 2 turns to download it, and I just have them sit there. But what that does is it gives the rest of the team time to do stuff, right? I'm not and basically what I do is I actually do the tally. I keep the tally, so number of successes you get, but then I also have, every time you do an operation, the system rolls, and if it rolls better than your evasion, then you get a tally, and then, oh, hey, you know what? You were sitting here for 4, a piece of investigative ice pops up, and so it'll be it'll be like a sensor, something that's just investigative white ice, and then after that it'll be like tracer ice. And then after, if you're still in there after that, then it'd be gray, but that's like super high. I haven't done a decker, an NPC decker finding them and dumping them. I haven't done that yet.
I see.
I also
like that.
I like to keep Black Ice the realm of the realm of like ghost stories, like for when a decker goes into a node, and they can expect to run up against Black Ice, but I kind of like the idea of or Gray Ice, but I like the idea of Black Ice being something that like doesn't happen very often, and is something the decker is kind of like, I'm not even sure that's a real thing.
So that one. So what I want to do more than anything is I actually want to have the decker deck naked. So, there's a system where they have to crawl through, they have to go into like a clean room. They cannot bring a deck. So for some reason, one way or another, they actually have to deck naked. And then that's when either the gray ice would be the equivalent of black. Like they're putting their neurons on the line when they're facing off against ice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, shit. Straight to the meat.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I think decking naked is like super cool. Like you're just jacked right in there, and you know what? I figure your data jack would be able to put sensory input or whatever, and you're interfacing with the matrix.
That's awesome. It's I was thinking about that recently, where I was thinking about separate systems, like a local grid, and then separate systems within the grid, and then each system had nodes. But then one day I was like, what if I just did the whole facility as just like one system? That's with a few nodes.
That's usually how I like to handle it, is like there's one host, and everything doing things on that host are roles. Like turning on the cameras, that's a role. Disabling the door, locking the door, those are all roles, but like you can do them all from one place. and the virtual representation of that is different. The decker is doing things and going places virtually, but it's just one big, central control system. That's challenging enough generally, I think.
Right. It keeps it quick. So they can still do shit. It really does.
And like, I make the decker tell me what the iconography is for every one of their utilities. So they're kind of like forced into role playing. Like, hey, I'm going to run my attack program. What is it? Is it that giant needle? Is it a scythe? What is it? And how do you use it? So it gives them the ability to add that flourish into it and own their utilities. Because I figure if you're actually writing your own programs, you're going to stylize it how you want. Fit your theme.
Or you're going to you're going to run with the defaults so people underestimate you because they're like, oh, you mean the generic gun that everybody's attack program looks like? Yeah, you're a real threat there, buddy.
I've got a toothpick, I've got a toothpick of death, whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we should. You know what? I was thinking we should run some play test stuff. If we really want to grow the community and start getting people into it, we should have play test nights on Discord. And put some stuff together where new people, existing people can just drop in kind of off the fly. We have some pre-generated characters. They can choose whatever and then and run that or do character make nights as well.
Right. It's a good idea. I mean, just advertising that you're going to run a Shadowrun game is usually pretty... There's plenty of people wanting to play. There's not usually people that want to run it. So it's actually kind of, I think that would draw some people, for sure.
Yeah.
Just especially if it's come and learn it, not just come and play Shadowrun, but it's also we're teaching you Shadowrun.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? We're basically doing like they did at the conventions. I think that would really go a far way to building the community again.
Right. That's a good idea.
Well, because I think it's also a challenge for new players who want to play Shadowrun just to figure out what to play, right? Like there are 6 editions, and we're all constantly arguing. So a new player comes in and they're like, "I want to play Shadowrun," and all they get is a bunch of people telling them what not to do.
Oh my God, yeah.
And no one's like, "Hey, come over here."
And most of the time, it's don't play it at all. It's not worth it.
That's a fool's errand. Don't do it. Don't be seduced by the dark side.
What the hell? I thought this was the Shadowrun subreddit, and people were telling them not to play Shadowrun. What the hell?
So I think your idea, Platinum, is a good one because basically that's a way to encourage people to play as opposed to the Reddit standard of no, don't play the game.
Yeah, or get good.
You know what? We're gonna run combat. We're going to run Matrix. We're going to run... So what I need help with, to be honest, is the whole rigging side of things.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Running combat with rigging and drones and that, so it's effective. The whole signal thing just that baked my brain. But there's got to be an easier way to do vehicle combat and rigging and remote drones and stuff better.
One thing I will say as a person who's played both 2E and 3E predominantly is that 3rd edition often poisons my vehicle rules mind, and I often think that something is way harder than it actually is when I'm playing 2nd, because I remember what rigging was in 3rd edition, and It is the most complicated thing. There isn't a system more complicated in 3rd edition than rigging.
It's Rigor 2, right? Or is it different than Rigor 2?
It's Rigor 3. Rigor 2 is... I think Rigor 2 might be a 3rd edition book, but just look at the core chapter of Shadowrun 3rd edition. I challenge you. Try to read through the Rigor chapter in Shadowrun 3. Yeah. I'm a person who reads role-playing game rule books all the time, and it's something I do for fun. And that chapter is just it's too much. There's too many things that they want you to do just to drive a car. So
that's what turned into the whole wireless Matrix thing, and I'm just like, no, you made a whole
super
meta.
One of my players asked about like remote, like he was like, wait, you could buy drones? And I'm like, yeah. And well, they're like, how's that work? And in my head, I'm like, I don't know how they work. I don't think it tells you how they work in second edition, but I'm kind of like, it's just like another character you run. I don't know. It's like instead of you walking around, you're running this drone around. And I'm not really, I don't think there's any rules for distance or range or any of that in second edition. And I'm actually okay with that. I don't give a fuck. I'm like, cool, it's good. It flies, it does what you tell it to within reason. I might use like the vehicle, like the terrain rules, you know, and just kind of like abstract that with like wind or weather or buildings in the way or whatever, you know. But I kind of love that too. He kind of stays out of your way. I could see if you were like, I'm gonna like invest in this full on just a rigger. I could see being disappointed a little bit with core rigger rules. But
who was it that brought up the skills earlier? The thing that's one of the biggest challenges for a rigger player, I think, is that like they buy vehicle skills for the vehicles they have. And then you give them karma and they're like, what do I do with this? I've got all my vehicle skills.
Right.
Yeah, true.
And that's one of the challenges. The rigger doesn't have a lot to do with their skills outside of driving things. And so that's that's a puzzle that
improve your gunnery.
I was about to say
to start to attach onto your bomb. Remote detonate your bombs.
Yeah, I was about to say gunnery. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
there's always something.
Yeah, but it's there when you look at like the number of etiquette skills you have to choose from, and how easy it is to like implement them and deploy them. And you look at the number of fighting and attack skills you have, and how easy it is to implement and deploy them. Find a weapon that does this thing, and then do the thing. Riggers have a smaller pool.
Yeah,
it's the same problem with what we were talking about, the detective thing earlier. It's that same problem. And I think that the key to it is having a solid list of custom knowledge skills that you can suggest to the player.
Right.
So when the player comes to you and says, I don't know what else to do with my karma, I've got all the car skills, I've got all the vehicle skills that I care about, you can be like, well, you know what else would help out your rigging? Gunnery.
Right.
And also, here's this knowledge skill that I would give you advantage if you used. So.
And I've found like just that discussion in the beginning is so important, is so helpful with that too. Like I've got a character, she's a bruiser, she's a troll bruiser with a ton of fucking skills. But like when I was talking to my player, I was like, well, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I want her to be like, she's kind of weird and she wants to be like an actress or whatever. And he really wanted that to be a part of her character. And I'm like, okay, we'll make a method acting like skill you have, like a knowledge, or it's not like a knowledge skill so much. It's an active skill, but it's like an etiquette skill, And I just was like, I feel like just having that conversation with them, if you asked your rigger, okay, you're feeling a little bit like there's not enough for you to do, like, what do you want to do? And then it's like, well, this, and this. It's like, okay, well, we'll create those skills for you. We'll make those, you can put points into that make you good at that.
Yeah. That's something third edition did better than second edition, is that skill, that the way you can deploy like all of these characterful, like interesting skills that you feel like your character is a fully realized person because they know a lot about like 2050s pop music.
Right. It forced knowledge skills.
That's the thing where you're like, they make you come up with characterful skill definitions. And I think that there's room to do that in second edition, but second edition doesn't force you to do it. They let you do it.
Right. It's very free form, but doesn't explicitly tell you to do it.
Yeah. I would put that into character background, right? Like, I'm interested in, comic books, or anime or whatever. And that would be written in their background. And then you would just get that skill.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas in third, it's kind of forced, but I found it was detracting, right? Like, it's like, yes, at 900, you have more stuff to spend on your karma, your 900 karma on, but when you're at 50, like, is it really that valuable? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm of that same mindset, but I understand some people like I get the value of explicitly making you do it, because then it's like you can't. It's everyone's admitting it's an important part of the game, and here are rules on how to implement it, and it is important when you're first starting to get playing. But as you start to get comfortable with Shadowrun, I more and more I lean into the soft, cozy bosom of second edition because it's just so much more freeing. It's just like, just do what you want, man. It's very like the Dude, Big Lebowski feel. It's just like, whatever, man. It's fucking etiquette.
Second edition abides, man.
Yeah.
I really use a lot of third magic, but other than that, I'm pretty much pure second edition. I just use some of the concepts from third, but
it's a pretty good edition.
Second edition. Yeah. Well, I think rules as written, it's the strongest by far.
I would agree with that.
As written. Yeah.
I think all of us here would agree.
Yeah. You mean you guys spending your fucking Thursday night talking for 3 hours about this edition? Like this game? But I do think it's like it's you do have to get over that hump. It is like it's tough to it's like you gotta free your mind a little bit. It is kind of like smoking weed kind of with second edition. It's like you gotta kind of relax, because I think Shadowrun can get so uptight, especially later editions. It's like there's so many, rules for things that
what they lost the essence of the rule of cool. They tried to just define everything instead of saying, you know what, here's a base set of mechanics. We didn't write everything. Extend it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and we've come into this in previous discussions about how almost all of the rules that are in the core book in third edition are in source books for second edition.
Right.
And they've been tweaked for third edition and cleaned up and polished, but they're all there.
It's all there.
But what second edition does is they say, okay, so if you really want a complicated martial arts rule system, we've got one in this source book for you. In Fields of Fire, you can do martial arts. Yeah. However, you don't gotta, because it's not in the core book. So use the ones you like.
Yep.
The other ones ignore, and we're all good.
It's almost like the understanding was like, if it's not in the core, if it's not in the rules, then make it. Right? Like that was kind of how it felt in second edition. Whereas like later editions, you're right. Like all of that crunch material got rolled into the core, and if it's not in there, then it's either you can't do it, or it's got to be in another source book somewhere. I'll find it.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask, I always disallow cash for karma and karma for cash. What do you guys do? Do you guys do that?
I haven't run into that personally.
I haven't used it much, basically because it like players don't think to use it is really what it comes down to. If I had a player who was like, yeah, I would like to convert this money into free time, I'd be like, that's how it works, man. So let's figure this out. But most players don't have enough money to convert into karma that they want to burn it. And I don't think a lot of players have really thought of it as an option. So it doesn't come up.
Cool.
But it is one of those things.
It's my least favorite rule.
If you're wealthy enough, you have all the free time you want. And that's kind of what that does, right? It's like, I spend money not having to do anything. I spend money not having to do things, so I have more time to practice my Aikido, for example. And that's really what it feels like it's trying to represent to me. But yeah, I haven't used it very much at all.
Cool.
I could see it breaking things pretty quickly. It's just it makes them like not important. At a certain point, if it's just like one will buy the other, then why are you even tracking both?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I covered everything I wanted to cover, unless you guys had more you wanted to talk about. I know we kind of already touched on most of the stuff after the Matrix systems. We did the Game Leap Valley a little bit.
We didn't talk about reputation, but there's only a paragraph of that, really.
Yeah,
a little thing.
Notoriety.
Yeah. Right. Which I think is, pretty straightforward, and, I don't know there's much to discuss out of it, so.
I think that's more of the, the reputation and the notoriety is more about the Pink Mohawk side of things, whereas on the other side, it's kind of like there's a professionalism. But then I don't know. Like you just gauge that on the maturity of your team. Some people are professional at the gate, and some people take a while to develop that.
Right.
Yep.
I don't track that stuff normally. I mean, I'll just keep in mind, like, if they fucked over this person, he's not going to like them. And maybe it'll go deeper into the shadows a little bit, but I usually don't make a point to keep track of it.
Yeah, rules is written. It's basically how much karma you have earned determines like how like it's like the amount of karma you've earned, 1,000 minus the amount of karma you've earned divided by 50. I'm maybe botching the
that's exactly right.
And then you basically, that's the target number for somebody to have heard of you.
I see.
And that's I like that. I like that from a perspective of like players like to feel like their work is recognized in the community. And so I like to kind of keep that, but I generally just go, okay, so you have 80 good karma, you're known.
Right.
You know, people know you because you've generated that much karma's worth of Shadowruns. So
I had something I just thought of and then it jumped out of my brain. I hate when it does that.
That is my entire life.
Yeah, I was gonna make a similar comment.
Yeah, we should do some other like character making nights and decking. Run. You know what? That would be really cool. In the GM section, get a bunch of GMs to like, you learn by playing with other GMs, right? Seeing what some people do really, really well. There should be like a GM, play test area where, we run things for each other to kind of just share the knowledge and what's working at our tables.
That's a really good idea, especially Matrix. I mean, I think everyone would benefit, like, outside of this Discord. I think people would come into this Discord to just like learn Shadowrun, like you're saying. I think if we had people teaching Matrix, like that's the barrier for Shadowrun. Yeah. I feel like.
Yeah.
I mean, it's for me. I haven't even I haven't had the confidence to fully run it yet.
And everybody has a completely different version in their head of how it's supposed to work. And so I think one of the things that it could really do to see how other people run Matrix or try to run Matrix is you look at what they do and you're like, oh shit, I didn't think about that. That's actually a really good way to do that.
And when you see a bunch of different ways, you realize you're not dumb for thinking you didn't get it. Like, it's like there's no wrong way, no right way. It's like what works, because
none of us got it. That's the problem.
Yeah. That was a huge confidence booster for me. Just to hear how many veterans of Shadowrun still fuck shit up made me feel like better about it, because you don't see that much. When you look at like the forums and stuff, it's people, really dunking on each other on getting a fucking number wrong on something, and you're like, oh my god, I don't even want to like get involved in this game, I think. And then you play it, and you realize it's just you're supposed to have fun. That's all.
Yeah, that's really what's kept me off of Reddit or the Reddit Shadowrun stuff, is I'm like, I do not have patience for these arguments. They're just not. You
have a higher willpower than I do.
I just downvote 6E or 5E and don't say anything.
I was just going to be like, you just go to Reddit and downvote everything. That's actually a good idea. I think I might try.
No.
I mean, they're doing that.
Anything 6E or 5E, I downvote. Anything 2E, I upvote.
It's very simple. Yeah, they do that for 2E, so why not? Even the scales.
True.
Cool, man. Right. Yeah, so I figure in a month I'll see. We'll check in with Tom again. I'll see if I can get a hold of him and see if he wants to join back in. But otherwise, we should still meet up in a month. And I feel like we could do the contact section super short. So we should do like contacts and critters.
I feel like that makes sense.
I think those would be very quick, very easy. And you know what? Maybe we should. What do you think about like a workshop? Maybe we could brainstorm and create some new stuff.
For the
right?
If we can be troubled to do homework, some of us could bring stuff to the critters discussion.
Yeah. But I was thinking like there's a D&D stream on Saturdays where brainstorm adventures or monsters or magic items or whatever, and we could do something similar. Like I wanted to come up with a rhino shapeshifter. Like, what would the stats on that be?
I'm all for it, man.
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
Cool. Yeah, maybe we can do some workshopping stuff together in there too.
I like it.
I think critters and contacts thematically make sense. It's sort of like the metahuman critters and then the non-metahuman critters covered in one subject.
Exactly.
I like it.
Called you.
And it's about the right. It's about the right. Similar size chunk as our other sections, like almost about 40 pages. Yeah. So it's kind of perfect.
It sounds kind of like a tabletop role playing game. Hey, you guys want to play Contacts and Critters?
Contact. I mean, that's what this game is. It says Contacts and Critters.
When you boil it down, it's the most important part of the game.
It is.
Contacts and Critters.
Oh, and gear, but that's in parentheses underneath. Yeah, Contacts, exactly. Critters, and gear. Gear porn.
And gear.
And now we save the gear section as like its own section or something. That's nice.
Yeah.
It deserves
it. I think the gear section is going to be, I think, a fun one to talk through.
Yeah, man.
Because there's so much going on in there.
It's where, let's face it, it's where everyone flips to instantly. Like they pick up this book, they're like, man, look at these fucking guns and sweet contraptions. So
the Street Samurai's catalog and Shadowtech were what sold it for me. As soon as I saw that, I was just like, wow. And the writing of that was just the humor awesome. In the Street Samurai catalog and the technical brilliance that was in Shadowtech just sold me on the game.
They're amazing. They're amazing. I'll be honest.
The actual Street Samurai on the cover is hilarious too.
He's awesome. Well, I don't know if you guys, let me see if I can pull it up. There's a Mona Lisa Overdrive, the book, the old cover. It looks just like this. Just like the Street Sam guy.
Street Sam looks like he has not been in the city long. Like, to me, he's somebody who's like the Street Sam who lives in the swamp and comes in the city for work. That's what he looks like to me.
Oh, it's this. Okay, here it is. Copy image. I don't know why that style. It was just like the hodgepodge mismatch of sword.
I've never seen that.
I hadn't either. It was from our buddy, one of my friends. They have a podcast that's low tech, high tech, low life, and they put this on Twitter. And I'm like, is it the fucking streets? Is this like another language for the Street Sam cover or something? And then I'm like, oh, that's Mona Lisa Overdrive.
That is wild.
It just reminds me of the Street Sam catalog, and I love it.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
And I love the girls in the background too.
I kind of want to hunt down this copy of Mona Lisa Overdrive now.
Right? I want all the old book covers of William Gibson. They're amazing.
Speaking of artwork and stuff, the Larry Elmore, who did the cover of like first and second edition, which is like fucking awesome. I just happened to be like looking at my collection of books, and I realized that he did the artwork for some Dragonlance stuff as well. And I was like, oh, holy shit! I didn't realize that he was like doing art for like completely different genres.
No, I knew him in the 90s for D&D art. He did all of the Dragonlance. He did a lot of Forgotten Realms stuff. Like, I didn't know him for science fiction at all before Shadowrun. So
that's talented because he really nails it.
Yeah,
and he really brings that like what I think he does really well in this is he brings that kind of fantasy into this art really well.
Yeah,
like the elf and the hot shaman chick. Like it's just like that's like the swords and sorcery babe right there. You know,
yeah.
It felt like D&D but something different.
Sally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sally's
exactly.
Fun,
yeah, that's Sally.
Yeah, that's her name in the.
It's Dodger, Sally, and Ghost Who Walks, right? I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Oh man, yeah, I read those books so long ago. I remember Sally's name, and I remember Dodger because he pops up in the source books all over the place. But the Ghost guy, I could not remember his name.
Such an awesome cover. All right, guys. I don't know.
You can get it signed from the author still, and not from the artist.
And it's not a printed signature. He'll actually like physically sign it for that money.
Yeah.
Wait, where? Who? Where?
Somebody posted a link recently for Larry Elmore's like website, and you can buy prints of the poster, and it says that it includes like a signature. And I was like, oh, it must be printed. But if it's real, that's really cool.
Good Lord. Okay. I'm buying that.
It was like $45 for a poster size. Like, and I was like, wow, that sounds awesome.
I would pay that for the fucking poster by itself.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a high quality print. Like, it's HD, so it's really nice.
Well, there's the link. There's the link right there. There's the link for everyone if they're watching this YouTube after. Everyone buy his signature and a poster right now. That's awesome. Awesome.
Sweet.
All right. Yeah. So in a month we'll meet up. We'll figure out a date in the chat, and we'll read. Until then, we can read the contacts and the what was that after that? Contacts and critters. And yeah, if you want to workshop something and bring it in, that'd be fucking cool. We could talk through it, and we should also in the chat figure out. Yeah, we should dig in more in this idea that Platinum had about having workshops, just teaching people. I think that's that's what Shadowrun needs. It's like you need people that know what they're doing to teach new people. That's how it works. Because unfortunately, the books don't really do that now.
I don't know if you guys for people that played 5th edition, there was that guy Bobby on YouTube that would do those little stick figure clips of complicated rules for 5th edition, and I used to go to those all the time. There's nothing cooler than a little animated 2-minute video. Yeah, it's like complex action. That was so cool. If we had something like that for a 2nd edition, it'd be so much fun.
And everybody thinks that you need to be a rocket scientist or dream in spreadsheets, and it's I don't know, it's just so intuitive. It makes sense. You look at cover, you look at lighting, and those are your modifiers.
The only thing you need a spreadsheet for is karma.
Right.
What, sorry?
The only thing you need a spreadsheet for is karma.
Exactly.
Which you have.
Which I already have.
It's true.
Yeah. I'll make a public copy of my spreadsheet and then just share it out to this thread so people can grab it and do what they want with it.
Nice.
But like we mentioned earlier, the biggest hurdle is Matrix. The game might as well be called where man and magic avoids machine in my book. So if you could iron out a night of that would be cool.
Yeah, definitely. I would show up for that too. And it's kind of how I feel. It's a great idea because it's sort of how I know I wanted to learn Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? I got really into Goodman Games and their books are just awesome and the way they write. I love their sensibilities. So I wanted to learn how to play it. And I want to learn how to run it, but you got to play it first. So I go to their Discord and they're someone's running a game at some point throughout the day. You can join a game at any time. And so I played 2 or 3 games. And then once I did it, I kind of understood how it ran and I started running it. And I feel like the same exact thing could happen here. We get some people to come in a few times. I personally will not run Matrix yet, but I will play it as someone teaches me, and then I'll run it once I get the feel of it. And now you got 2.
That would be awesome. Do it wrong, but right. My way.
And if we're recording that and then just make it available on YouTube, then anybody can go back and watch it. It would be awesome.
Yeah, true.
If your wrong works and feels right, it's not wrong.
Right. Anything that feels right isn't wrong. This hedonistic.
Oh yeah, baby.
Yeah. All right, guys. Cool. So we'll read those chapters, and if we have some homebrew workshopped ideas, we'll bring them in, and we'll talk then.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Have a good night, guys. That was awesome.
Cheers. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Later. There you go. There's the latest installment of the Shadowrun 2nd Edition Book Club. As of now, we don't have the date for the next meet scheduled. So if you want to join in, there's plenty of time. Join the Classic Shadowrun Discord, and you can check the description below on how to do that. And you can be up to date. You can see when we schedule that, and you can get involved. For next meet, we are reading the contacts and the critters sections. We also may bring some homebrewed stuff, critters or magic items or some crazy shit that you have used in your game that was fun that you'd like to also bring to the table. Awesome. Let's bring it in. Let's fucking talk about it. Let's do this shit. Let's talk about Shadowrun. We love this game. Thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you guys next time.